Coming back. It's great. I don't know if this is the first like in-person podcast that you guys have both been a part of or not, but it's
well, together, yeah, I think, right?
I think so. We've done them virtually, but
Yeah.
together, yeah.
In the same actual room.
That's what I meant. That's what I meant. Yeah, in the room. I know you've been on a bunch of Ben's podcasts before.
Yeah.
We've been in the same room before, but not combining that with a podcast.
Been in the same room.
We have.
We've done podcasts together, but this is the first time doing a podcast together in the same room.
I love it.
Now, is this is not the room we did last time?
This is the same room.
Yeah.
It is.
Yep, same room.
Okay.
So how's it feel to get censored by Joe Rogan?
It was a relief because, well, it's kind of a long story.
I know he didn't. For people listening, he didn't really get censored by him. The video,
No.
you guys just decided not to publish it for some reasons.
Well,
but there was a lot of people that were going crazy about that.
Yeah, a couple of reasons. The one reason was, well, first of all, let me just give you.
Well, thank you guys for coming back. It's great. I don't know if this is the first like in-person podcast that you guys have both been a part of or not, but it's
Well, together, yeah, I think, right?
I think so. We've done them virtually, but
Yeah.
together, yeah.
In the same actual room.
that's what I meant. That's what I meant. Yeah, in the room. I know you've been on a bunch of Ben's podcasts before.
Yeah.
We've been in the same room before, but not combining that with a podcast.
Been in the same room.
We have.
We've done podcasts together, but this is the first time doing a podcast together in the same room.
I love it.
Now, is this is not the room we did last time?
This is the same room.
Yeah.
It is.
Yep, same room.
Okay.
So how's it feel to get censored by Joe Rogan?
It was a relief because, well, it's kind of a long story.
I know he didn't. For people listening, he didn't really get censored by him. The video, you guys just decided not to publish it for some reasons.
Well,
but there was a lot of people that were going crazy about that.
Yeah, a couple of reasons. The one reason was, well, first of all, let me just give you a little of the background on this. I had been on Rogan with Graham Hancock, and the question of what kind of energy technology may the ancient cultures might they have been using, if any. And I don't remember exactly. I think maybe Graham or Rogan, Joe looked at me, kind of deferred to me, and I kind of mentioned offhand that, I had an idea what it may have been. And before we went in, Graham and I had discussed that we were not going to get into the whole energy dimension of talking about ancient cultures and stuff, because for one thing, that's a little bit outside of Graham's purview. He's looking at artifacts and I mean, he's looking at different kind of evidence, but the question is hovering over always. And I think it had come up to the question had come up to the quarrying of these and transport of these great stones, and I mean, Ben will address that, I'm sure, in our conversation today. The growing evidence that they did have some kind of, the ancient peoples did have some kind of a technology that has been lost. Okay, so I just kind of dropped an offhand remark that, I kind of thought I had some ideas along that lines, and instantly Joe honed in on that and insisted I talk about it. And I didn't intend to talk about it because I felt at the time what I knew and what I had learned, to talk about it would have been premature. Because that's the way I like to vet things before I start talking about them, like I know what the hell I'm talking about, right? So anyways, Joe kind of pressed the issue, and I kind of got into it a little bit, and then he asked me if I would come back to talk about it in greater detail. And I think, and I said sure, and I think I went back in November of last year. But in the interim, a couple of things happened. As a result of what I did disclose on Joe's show, I mentioned Malcolm Bendel, the inventor, that I had been having a dialogue with at that point for about 7 years, while he had been building and testing prototypes, and explaining to me the science and ideas behind it, right? So when I first talked to him, I was like, okay, sounds interesting, but I don't know. I don't have the command of the science to really determine whether this is legitimate or not. So over the course of the years, I learned additional things, and I had a conversation with an Australian author named Roland Perry, also an investigative reporter who actually wrote a book about Malcolm. He did the probably one of his most famous books is his biography of Mel Gibson.
Oh, wow.
So I had a long conversation with him on the phone, and as a result of that, I kind of came away, well, it sounds like this is legitimate. Now, this guy, Malcolm, that I'd been talking to, it sounded like he had led a pretty interesting life and was, like a lot of geniuses, somewhat eccentric. But what I learned was, and I'm not going to get into the specifics of this, is that he got caught up in some scandals in the 90s and early 2000s based upon the fact that he had been his background was in geochemistry, and he was an oil prospector, and he discovered an oil deposit that was coveted by one of the mainstream energy companies, and he held a license to the drilling rights, and they wanted that license. So what they did was embarked on a campaign to scare away any potential investors. So they bribed politicians, they bribed journalists to basically concoct a smear campaign. And because of his background, there was food that they could take and exaggerate and take things out of context, just like they've done to so many, like they've done to Graham Hancock. When he came out with Ancient Apocalypse, I don't know how much you saw in the mainstream a treatment of Ancient Apocalypse, that Graham was being portrayed as a white supremacist, a racist, a conspiracy monger, all of this stuff. This is what they do. When you go out, you step outside the approved narrative, they start throwing it at you. They're doing it right now to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., trying to paint him as a complete nut job because he's questioned the efficacy of vaccines, and you're not allowed to do that. If you do, and the approach is always not looking at specifically what you say and what data, what facts, what evidence you bring forward, but it's all character assassination. So there had been this whole slew of this stuff that had come out in the 90s, early 90s and early 2000s as a result of this whole episode. The upshot of it is that the board of directors of this particular energy company ended up resigning because they got caught in the scandal.
One of the big oil companies?
One of the big oil companies, yeah. So as a result of that, Malcolm was so fed up with the politics and all of that he decided that he was going to shift gears and go back to what he had been working on literally since he'd been in high school, which was alternative energy based upon the control of plasma, which is the fourth state of matter. After solid, liquid, gas, you have plasma, and plasma has extremely interesting properties to it. So the bottom line was this. Malcolm actually came to America, and one of the purposes he came here was, amongst several reasons, but one of the reasons was he was going to tutor me in the science and the technology. So we spent several months. I worked with my colleague Brad Young, who I've done a lot of. Ben knows him well. We've been doing research together, traveling, organizing tours and all this. And Mike Robertson, who is the CEO of HowTube.com, where you will now find a whole lot of this stuff dealing with plasma technology. So the three of us worked with Malcolm, developed a 243 slideshow. Then Malcolm proceeded to do a lecture series discussing what we had built on this slideshow over something like 10 hours of lectures. Okay, now this came after, but so he was here. I was scheduled to go on to Joe Rogan, and so myself, Brad Young, George Howard, who is he's one of the, I would say, primary people in the cosmic research team.
Yep.
He does the website Cosmic Tusk, and he's been in the forefront of, studies about the Younger Dryas, catastrophism, and all of this. He rode out there with us. another fellow that kind of was an assistant to me. We went out there together. I went on Joe's, and Malcolm came with. Before we went on the show, I asked Joe if because Joe wanted me to talk about the science, and I thought, okay, here I've got the guy himself, and he's going to be able to really get into a much more explicit and accurate discussion of the science than I'm going to be able to. So I called up Joe before the interview, and I said, just so happens the inventor is here. What do you think about inviting him on, and we can talk about the technology and the science and what is a plasma and so on. And he said, sure. Okay, so now in the interim, Jamie, who's Joe's producer, he started looking, found all of this stuff from, several decades ago that was part of this smear campaign. It'd be just like if 10 years from now somebody's going to, okay, who's this guy Graham Hancock, or who is this guy? And they pull up, oh, this guy's a white supremacist. He's a, he's a racist. He's out there promoting, conspiracy theories and all of this kind of stuff. There's a whole list. And if you go back through the list of these inventors and scientists that have worked on these kinds of things all the way back to Nikola Tesla, you see that there's a repeating pattern of suppression, of discrediting, of character attacks, all of that kind of stuff, right? So as we walk in to sit down, Jamie has just dumped this pile of stuff in front of Joe, and Joe is looking at it, right? Well, so my priority and goal, which was to talk about the science, at that point completely got derailed for the most part. And it got into the politics, the scandals, the conspiracy theories. And if it ever does get aired, you'll hear that I'm constantly trying to steer it back to the science. I had put together a slideshow and, and it kind of went back and forth. And Malcolm got, defensive because Joe kind of went into attack mode, which, had there been merit to this, would have been a valid thing to do. But so and then in the course of it, there was several comments made that really
Big
kind
Angel,
of
what's up, bro?
encroached upon a territory that was being covered under non-disclosure agreements. That was part of it. Part of it was just the emphasis on politics. And as it's going on, I'm kind of like shaking my head and going, oh, this is not where I wanted this thing to go. I wanted to talk about plasma technology. We're talking about all this other stuff. So at the end of it, we, adjourn. Joe catches me on the way out, and he says, hey, would it be okay with you if I didn't air this right away, if I spent some time vetting it? And I said, for me, it was like, yes, that's fine. It was almost like a relief to me that this was not, because I knew it was going to completely derail the conversation into discussion.
I'm trying to be,
so
man.
I said, I'm fine with it.
I'm trying to be,
also asked me if I would
They have
come
this
back
thing
on
called like a
just
brand
myself,
ambassador.
and I agreed to that and said, sure.
I could play the YouTube video. I left a comment.
But, in my
I was
mind, I
rejected
wanted
to
get
be a
better
brand
grip
ambassador. I think it's because
on
I'm in Canada.
the technology, so I could
Might
talk
be wrong,
about
though.
it knowledgeably.
I left the
And
comments.
also,
It's
I knew that
friggin',
there was testing coming.
what's it called?
was in
Shilling
the
my
pipeline.
YouTube
There
and
was gonna be some
my
major
Twitch.
testing going on, so well, let's wait until the testing is complete, and then the testing will
Trying to be, bro.
objectively show whether or not the technology is
I mean, I do
whether
take
it's
it, right?
legitimate or so on. And now
180,
the testing
yeah.
is ongoing right now. There have been like
I
reference
don't know,
to
man.
what happened
I don't know
at
if I'm
the
gonna do
Tesla
that.
Tech conference in Albuquerque a few weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you vetted that pretty.
I
what
do.
did
I
you-
know. I do
Yeah,
remember
well,
when
yeah, a
you
couple
wanted
things
me when you
to
went when you
say.
moved
I
up
mean,
from
I
115 to
feel like-
135 or
I mean,
135 to
I don't know
150.
Malcolm.
I
I've not
remember
had
that,
the chance to
man.
meet him, but I've been intensely.
I haven't
interested
gone up. I did go up to
in hearing about
185,
the technology,
205, but then
and
I came
particularly
back
its
down. I don't know. It
relationship
just
to things like
feels nicer.
it seems to have some properties of sacred geometry. There's and we can get into some of those topics, but I've heard similar things where you talk about the his reputation or the fact that he's been set up, and there's dirt that you can dig up online if you search for him, and certainly just through social media and other people, I've had people reach out to me that are worried about you and your association with him. My response to most of that,
Thanks, man. But I think
is
I'm going to
usually
stay
like, well,
at 165.
people can be eccentric.
doing
And
more
genius
reps,
often
too.
is eccentric, right? There's very
I'm
rarely
doing,
you see
like, trying to do the
geniuses
2-3
and people
reps.
that, whether they're right or wrong, kind of.
'Cause at
have a
180 I
decent
could do, like,
chance in the
1 or
world.
2.
It doesn't seem common that they're just like regular normal people. Nikola Tesla's a great example. I mean, he was more or less pretty antisocial. Probably would be.
Yeah, buddy, I did. I was at 205
not
before. I
received
was at
really well.
205 for like a long
feel
time.
really strange to have met in
Came back
person.
down to 185 and now I'm
but
at
you
one.
can
What am I?
separate
165?
kind of
Yeah.
the man from the mission. Randall mentioned this earlier, right? It doesn't just if he's eccentric or
I was at
these
185.
things,
though,
you know,
I
there's
was.
dirt on him, all these things that have
don't
been
know.
said about him. It
I don't
doesn't
think I'm not
necessarily
gonna
mean
switch
that
it, I
he's
don't think.
wrong. You can separate those things. So I've personally been interested in kind of the technology and to find out, you know, let's get it tested. I've seen some of the theory. I've seen some videos of devices doing things, but there's always been the talk of the testing, and I've been talked to people that are involved in this, and then recently. In Albuquerque at I think it was the Tesla convention. I wasn't there, but I've spoken to people who were, and I think you can find videos of it on YouTube. Malcolm was there. They brought a device. They had it hooked up to I think a 20 kilovolt generator. It had the whole thunderstorm thing attached to it, and there were a number of people there. I mean, that's kind of an alternative energy conference, and you typically have a lot of physicists and chemists and very qualified people that are interested in these things. Engineers that turn up, and there was a number of people with their own instruments like spectrometers and gas analyzers, and they hooked it up to this device that's running off. You know, it's basically, as far as I understand it, there's a couple of different varieties of it, but one variety is one that is attached to a regular internal combustion engine, and they were seeing some frankly remarkable results just on the spot, and you can see this in. You know, on YouTube, there's been a couple other reports about it on the internet, but, you know, it's doing things like removing carbon monoxide from the exhaust. You're increasing the percentage of oxygen. In fact, potentially even producing net oxygen might be a result of this. But, yeah, I mean, and the CO2 levels go down, plus your engine efficiency goes way up. It's kind of like a feedback loop it works in tandem with an engine. So that to me is very interesting. And what I think it all needs is kind of, you know, third-party independent verification and testing, which is, I'm sure, something that's being pursued. So yeah, it was that Tesla conference and the data that came out of that was pretty interesting. And I mean, I personally, technology aside, I'm interested in some of the theory behind it and its potential application as something that may not necessarily be a new discovery so much as a rediscovery, because as Randall said, I'm fairly convinced that there's plenty of evidence that suggests there were some powerful tools and techniques and technologies being employed far in the past. I think it's the only way to explain some of the signatures we see in stone, some of the logistical achievements that have been made. And, you know, at the bottom line of what that means is that there must have been a power source to have this technology operate. So this is a potential candidate, I think. I don't know. I'm interested in it from that perspective.
Now, do you think this plasma technology, you said it's a possibility, but like how much of a possibility is that this stuff is responsible for some of the moving 1,000-ton stones or cutting some of these immensely like hard stones?
Well, let me put it this way. Now that I've got a better grasp of what it is, the more I learn about it, the more it seems like it would be the prime candidate for an alternative technology, and the technology upon which an entire civilization could be based. Yes, that seems to me to become increasingly likely, because it is so ubiquitous. The whole idea of plasma technology in the fourth state of matter is real. And there have been a lot of scientists who have been studying it for decades, and so it's well-known phenomena, and it lends itself to all of these kinds of things that, you know, the alternative energy community and alternative ancient history community have speculated about. It seems to fill a lot of the gaps in that knowledge. And so ultimately it's going to be, you know, the testing and building of prototypes, and that's why Malcolm's got a nonprofit organization called the Strike Foundation. So they've applied for some patents, which are applications of the technology.
Yo, what's
I'll
up?
give you an example. A chimney
What is up,
scrubber that would
Van
be,
Schicks? Welcome.
You know, on a coal
I'm
plant.
16 years
coal-fired
old.
Plant.
Welcome.
So they've got a patent on that. Right?
Sorry, I'm trying
But
to read the
basic
chat, but it's
principles,
like giving me issues.
are
sec.
being put out for free
5 for
access
5.
with the idea to encourage
bad.
people to take those
And,
principles and work with them,
nice
test
man.
them. So We got somebody right now who's
got
going to be
a
attempting
green
sort of a
with a
backyard
t-shirt on.
mechanic who's going to be doing a retrofit of
It's
his
off.
car
I hear what you're
with the
saying.
technology, and that's one of the applications is you can retrofit any kind of engine or generator that operates on fossil fuel, whether it's regular gasoline or kerosene or natural gas or diesel, and it'll have the same effect.
The data is out there. I mean, I was talking with George Howard the other day, and he's saying that people are building these. Like, if you go sit through the 10 hours of content, it's out there, and you have the skills to
I
build
hear
one
what
of
you're
these and use it as an
I hear what
application.
you're saying.
You can,
Well-
and as Randall said, the people are. I've seen a few different videos on YouTube of people building these or running these systems. So it's a
Yeah, it seems like what
Yeah, I
type
mean,
of
I know that the data is going out
what
there,
type of nutrients are you
at
taking? It
least in
seems
the-
like
on the theory
you're trying
side,
to take a lot of
and
carbs
it's contained in those 10 hours of lectures that are up on
and
YouTube.
a lot of the
Yes,
sugars.
it is.
Yeah.
I would like
So
focus on like
it makes the
proteins
engines, you
and
said twice as efficient.
About
I mean, yeah,
twice as
with carbs. I would try to
So I
avoid
guess like the problem will be figuring
I
out a
don't
way
know,
to
I don't know
scale
what
it
you,
up.
I don't know your
right?
diet though.
they've
I
scaled
would just
it
try
up
to remove the fats.
to a
Like I don't eat
400
any
kilowatt
cookies. I don't eat
generator.
any desserts. I don't eat any
So that's,
butter.
you know, industrial
I mean, I'm older,
And he
right?
said,
I know what
Malcolm
you're saying.
said
I'm
in one of his
38.
presentations that this is
So I've already
it all is
grown,
based
but I
off
mean,
of sacred
I
geometry.
don't know if you have a healthy
Well,
diet.
yes,
It seems like there's an
because, for
over
example, the spheres are
surplus
in the
of
ratio
like
4 to 3 to 2.
carbs and fatty food.
And that's your fundamental number, 432. And the lengths of the pipe, the diameters of the pipe, all of these things are in
I mean,
those
if you're hungry,
ratios that
you
we
got,
get
I would
from
eat, but try not
the
to eat
ancient
something like
canon
fatty.
of
Don't eat like
sacred
late at
numbers,
night and
which is interesting to me.
Wow.
Otherwise, they don't work as effectively if you don't use the those particular ratios.
Okay. Now we're gonna do a whole separate podcast on this stuff and go like super deep into it. So I don't know if there's anything else. that
yeah.
we should
What's
share
your
for
activity
now,
too, right?
But I
Are
do
you-
want
are
to sort of
you,
dive deep into
Are you working out? Are you
the
lifting weights? Are you doing
fundamentals of sacred geometry because that's
exercise?
something that we
Right,
did not
that's
cover on our first episode.
That's huge.
Yeah,
too,
that's a
right?
great idea. I think that's an excellent idea.
Can you give people a basic
Honestly, I take
rundown,
whey
sort of an
protein.
elevator
I'm not
pitch of what
sponsored by
sacred
Six Star. I'm trying to get
geometry is
sponsored by
and how
them.
it ties into prehistory. With the busy fall
I take whey
season
protein
already in
daily. I
swing,
mean,
you
it is
might be
kind of,
looking
you
for
know,
some
as a
wholesome,
teenager,
convenient meals for those
you have to
jam-packed
ask your
days.
parents probably for the
Factor,
money to
America's
buy it,
number one
but
ready-to-eat meal kit can help you fuel up fast.
It's
With
food, right?
chef-prepared, dietitian
It's like I
approved,
said, I consider
ready-to-eat
it
meals
because you eat less
delivered
food when
straight
you
to your door.
have
It's a
the whey
great way to
protein,
save
that's
time,
fine.
eat well,
Especially
and stay on
breakfast.
track with your healthy lifestyle. If
It's
you're like
lean,
me and you're
right?
far too busy to always make sure you're
Like
eating well, that's where
3
Factor
grams
comes in
of
clutch. You can skip
sugar
that
and
extra
3
trip to
grams
the
of
grocery
fat per
store, as
30
well as all
grams
the
of
prepping, chopping,
protein.
and cleaning, and still get all the flavor
So I
and
take 2
nutritional
scoops of
quality that
6
you need.
grams of
Factor's
fat,
fresh,
6 grams
never
of
frozen
sugar,
meals are ready to
and
go in just
60
2
grams
minutes.
of
All you
protein
have to do is heat
a
and
day,
enjoy,
at
so you
least
can get
in
back to
in
crushing your
weight.
goals. Round up
To
your meals and
supplement,
replenish
like,
your snack
my
supply with
other
an assortment of 45
meat
plus
and
add-ons,
veggies
including
and
breakfast items like their delicious
I eat
apple
very
cinnamon
clean.
pancakes,
I'm a very
bacon and
clean
cheddar
eater.
egg bites, and potato bacon and egg breakfast
this
skillets.
is-
Or for an easy wellness
yeah.
boost, try refreshing beverage options like cold pressed
I mean, I don't
juices,
have-
shakes,
I
and
kind of have
smoothies. Head on
abs,
over to
but not really. Like, I know what you're saying by skinny fat. I know what you mean.
factormeals.com/DJP50 and use code DJP50 to get 50% off. That's code DJP50 at
But I'm also trying to, like, I've been kind of bulking.
factormeals.com/DJP50
Trying to
to get
a little bit.
50% off. Back to the show.
Well, excuse me. I think
I would
that
say
sacred
go
geometry
with
is
your
geometry, as
heart
most people know.
And what you feel
with
is
the
right.
additional component
It
of
seems like there's
being
a
symbolism
misalignment in
of
terms of
philosophy
energy
behind
expenditure
it,
and or
that
type
is-
of food you're
you don't
eating, the
find
consumption
in
of it.
Euclidean geometry.
Even like
So,
Coke and
you-
stuff. You're
Euclidean
drinking fruit
geometry
juice.
is
Fruit
your
juice turns
definitions,
immediately
your
into fat.
axioms, your
A lot of the
propositions
time.
and proofs and all of that. Well,
Or like
all
milk.
of that is part of sacred geometry.
Milk is good
but
for
in sacred
growth.
Geometry, we also get into the idea of there being symbolical meaning to the numbers. And
worry,
the
you'll
other
be
part
okay.
of
No
it is,
fear,
is
no
that the
need to
sacred
fear.
geometry, you don't even have to call it that. But what you do
Saturn
see
is
that
in
across
Pisces
the
right now,
spectrum
which
of
means that
nature,
we're all fearing the future. We all have,
all
especially
phenomena
today,
manifest
with
geometry.
Mercury and like
So,
Pluto in
If you
Aquarius.
look at the molecular level,
There's like
you'll see geometry
something
at work.
Sun is
If you look
squaring
at the
Uranus today or
cosmic or
some shit.
astronomical level, you'll see
With Saturn and
geometry at
Pisces, so
work.
we're all fearing
the
the
human
future
level,
as
you know,
things break apart
most people
and
that are at
structures
least
fold and
semi-educated about
rust
this
away
kind of material
the
know
change of
of
time.
the golden section, right?
So
the
what I'm saying
known
is
as the
you'll
divine
be okay.
proportion.
Like, don't stress
You know,
about
was
it.
used by Leonardo
Just
da
back me up.
Vinci and others.
I
going
feel
back
like
to the
ever since I
Middle
started
Ages.
lifting
Diagram
weights,
of
I've
the human
started
body.
Yeah.
my
And the
bone
human
mass
body is a
has
repository
grown,
of
density's grown, my strength has grown. I'm not sure if I've
divine
gotten taller or
proportions,
not.
it's been
Probably
called, the
not, but
golden ratio.
I just feel stronger.
And
Go
to
for
put
it.
it simply, imagine that you have a line. This is the simplest two-dimensional manifestation of it. Draw a line, and now you divide that line into two parts. If you divide it in the middle, now both sides of that line are the same length. And it's a very static situation. Nothing really, you can't get any additional properties out of that you could use in processes of growth, for example. You need to have an asymmetry, because now as soon as you have the asymmetry, now you have, see, if you have a line that's divided in the middle, that's very static. Artists know that, right? So
Absolutely.
in the sacred geometry, what you're doing is an asymmetrical division of a line in the one and only point where you create a proportional relationship between the length of the whole line, the longer segment, and the shorter segment. So in classes and lectures, I demonstrate this. It's much easier to grasp when you see it than just hearing about it. And I am actually in the process of creating a new level of sacred geometry courses, primarily aimed at the homeschool, the massively growing homeschool movement. Because I used to teach this, I did many years of teaching these principles to homeschooling classes of kids from the age of typically 9 to 17.
Oh, wow.
Discovered that when you incorporate the ideas of sacred geometry, it becomes 100 times more interesting than just your standard boring proofs and propositions and things. So,
Yeah.
but let's get back to that line.
Okay.
An asymmetrical line where the ratio of the small section to the large section is the same as the large section to the whole line. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a line and you divide it asymmetrically and you call the long length A, the short length B, and the whole length C. In this case, C is, if you picture, can be the sum, will be the sum of A plus B, won't it? Mm-hmm. Right? Okay, now let's go, we can take it either from the large to the small or the small to the large. Let's say the ratio of B over A is the same as A over C. The short is to the long as the long is to the whole, or the sum of the two. So you could say as short B is to long A is to A plus B. And that's the basic mathematical expression of the golden section. And then when you solve that, you find out that it has a value of 1.618, 0, etc. It goes out forever, just like pi, okay? Now that ratio is the ratio found ubiquitously throughout the natural world. Like I said, it's particularly associated with processes of growth. It's very much manifest in human anatomy. So, Danny, if you take your cubit, which is elbow to fingertip, right there built into your anatomy is the ratio I was just talking about. So hold up your forearm like this. Now feel around on your wrist, and you will find that there's a little space in your wrist joint. You can feel it. See,
Yep.
look, my thumb is in that space. It's
Yep.
called the space of desktop. Okay, so now imagine that line is your forearm from fingertip to elbow, and that asymmetrical division is marked by that space right there. So now look what you get. Small is to large, as the large is to your whole cubit, which is elbow to fingertip. So right there, it's right there. If you look at your fingers, you see, look at the digit of your middle finger, Danny. You start right here. You've got a joint right there.
Mm-hmm.
Now you'll notice the next joint is longer, isn't it?
Yes.
And then from the middle of your finger to your knuckle, that progression is in the golden ratio. So the small to the large is to the next larger, and then from there to the space of desktop, right? And then from there to your whole cubit. Now, do this. If you turn your forearm horizontal, and this is, you're standing on the floor and this is the top of your head, then this space of desktop would coincide with your navel. So again, it's this scale invariant relationship, and those are just a few examples. You know, your navel is not the middle of your body.
Right.
However, when you're born, it pretty much is the middle of your body. But as you grow into the divine proportion until you reach adulthood. Now imagine this. Think about the proportions of an infant. Now imagine if you took an infant with those proportions, the size of their head, the distance that their navel divides their body, and you enlarge that to the size of a full-grown adult, and you saw that person walking down the street, you would think they looked strange, wouldn't you?
A little bit, yeah.
Yes, you would. Well,
something from Game of Thrones.
So the thing is, you're growing into that ratio. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
And everybody
kind of.
deviates a little bit. Everybody deviates. Nobody's perfect, although there have been studies looking at artist models and things like that. And you know, the further away you deviate from it, the more, I guess you'd say, idiosyncratic, to use a polite term, that you look. And there have been studies done by artists and things looking at the proportions of the human face. Now, for example, if you do this, if you you make a rectangle and you use the short length as the short side of a rectangle and the long length as the long side, you now have a rectangle that is called a golden rectangle. That golden rectangle is frequently used to frame the composition of paintings, of architecture, many things like that. Also, artists came to understand that a golden rectangle will perfectly frame the face, the height, because you notice if your face was as wide as your head was tall, again, you would look strange.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
So, and then you can divide that rectangle. So if you think of this as a vertical rectangle, and I may have a slide. If you've enclosed your head into a vertical rectangle, golden rectangle, then if you lop off a square, what's left is another golden rectangle. So the square defines your brow ridge, like this. From your chin to your brow ridge would be a square. What's left over up here is another golden rectangle. But you can subdivide the features of the face according to the golden ratio. So you find it in your height, in the division of your navel, you find it in your forearm. It's all manifest throughout the human body. But it's manifest in all realms of nature, particularly in growing things. And we find it in molecular. Plays a very important role in the geometry of the DNA molecule.
Yeah, I mean, it's reflected in the spiral helix
Yes.
of DNA. If you take a cross section of the molecule, if you cut it and you look at that cross section, you'll find it reflected in that. So I like the golden ratios. I kind of think of it as a constant of our in our universe. It's a universal constant and you can go from the DNA, there's something that's the size of a molecule or a DNA helix, up to the structures of galaxies, and you'll also see in that spiral structure of galaxies the golden ratio is reflected in that as well. So it's like a natural constant. It's in nature, it's in life, as Randall says. Like it's expressed in nature, particularly in things that grow. But it's also seems to be it seems to be a constant in the very fabric or construction of our universe, like from the smallest levels to the very largest. So it's a kind of a fundamental principle of reality.
And what is this?
Well, this is a two-dimensional model of a section of a DNA molecule.
Okay.
And DNA is made up of these bases, these nucleotide bases, adenine, taurine, and you can see that they are a series of interconnected pentagons and hexagons. Well, your pentagons are a pure manifestation of the golden section. If you take a pentagon, which is a five-sided polygon, and you connect alternate corners, you get a pentagram. And the pentagram if you look at it, it subdivides completely into the perfect golden ratios
Right.
of the sides. So this is just, and this is one of the things I teach in my coursework, is how you find this geometry embedded in various things. So this is an example of your DNA molecule. So yeah, here's your organic nitrogenous base of the purines, and there's your pentagon. So it's like the geometry almost seems to be fundamental to the organization of the bases, the molecular bases. They use this geometry to build these molecular structures. And that's what you see right here. And the DNA is a great example. I don't know if I have the cross section here that
Okay, wow.
yeah, so here's your Vitruvian man. And the Vitruvian man shows one application of the squaring of the circle, and the golden section is very much intrinsic to the solution of the squaring of the circle problem, which is one of the great classical problems of antiquity. And what I'm trying to show in this slide here is this idea that while going back to this here, life is cosmic. Mm-hmm. Within the past several decades, studies of meteorites that have fallen to Earth have revealed that they contain the building blocks of DNA in the form of the purine nuclear bases, which, as we have seen, organize themselves according to the union of pentagonal and hexagonal rings. Their presence in meteorites provides powerful confirmation of the hypothesis that life originated in space and was subsequently delivered to Earth through the agencies of comets and their meteoritic offspring. It demonstrates that life is cosmic in origin and confirms that geometry is fundamental to the generation, function, and propagation of life throughout the universe.
Okay, I think I've heard this. This is what they call panspermia, right?
Well, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, that's right. Yep.
So this geometry, this understanding of geometry and everything that's tied into it with mathematics, it doesn't seem like it's something that is practiced in any sort of building or any sort of technology that we use today. Is that right?
To some extent, I think architects are getting more hip to the use of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think that's happening because, if you look at the 20th century, pretty much you can follow the recovery of these principles. Going back to, one of the early, I think, researchers into this was Jay Hambidge, who was a designer, illustrator who he called it dynamic symmetry. Mm-hmm. And dynamic symmetry was a system that I think was very much in use by ancient cultures throughout the world. And dynamic symmetry links together a lot of interesting relationships that we find in geometry, including the golden section. And it kind of synthesizes these things. I actually could pull up, I guess, a slide here on that we could look at, and you could see what it is. Let's see if I can go to. So this comes directly out of my sacred geometry course.
Okay.
And we'll see here, and you'll be able to kind of see how it works here.
Relationship to the meteorological systems of the ancient world.
Employed as the basis for temple construction, proportion, and orientation. Metrological.
That's what I kind of meant. I meant we don't build anything based on the universe. That seems to there's a lot of evidence that shows that a lot of the stuff that was built in prehistory does align.
Yes. Yes. So here's, this is straight out of my course. So if you take this course, this is where we begin with it. So erecting a line perpendicular to the endpoint of a given line, and I'm going to just I'm going to go through this really quickly. I'm not going to explain this. I'm going to get directly into the idea of dynamic symmetry. But it begins with being able to erect two perpendicular lines like you see here. And then from there, it'll go to creating a square. Okay. So we just went through a process of defining the four corners of a square. Now, once you've done a square, you now can proceed with the system. So the square's diagonals can now be drawn, creating a central point. So if you put in one diagonal and the other you get a central point within the square. See that? There it is right there. Diagonals of a square, inscribed and circumscribed circles, ratio of diagonal to the side of the square, and that shows the ratios right there. We won't get into that because I'm just going to give you the overall impression. So here's an inscribed circle. We can do another square inside there. So we've now got two squares, the circle inscribed in the larger one, circumscribed the smaller one, and that creates a specific, what's called a dynamic ratio. This ratio was fundamental to the ancient world and was used over and over again. And here we go, we've done it one more step, and it creates a series of concentric rings that have this dynamic proportional relationship, expanding or contracting. And it was used over and over again in the ancient world to establish the dimensions of temples and sacred structures. Now begin with a square. Call the length of any side 1. The length of each of the remaining sides will be 1. Agreed?
Right. Yep.
Okay. The area of the square will also be 1 square unit. And you put in that diagonal, and you can use the Pythagorean theorem, and you'll see that the diagonal is equal to the square root of 2. Which it says right there is 1.414213562, ... meaning it goes on forever without repeating, without terminating. Okay, so then what we do is we use that diagonal of that square, as you see right there. Now, if you're drawing this, you would be drawing with a compass. You would put after the square is drawn, set your compass point at A and open to the radius AC, and you swing an arc down, and you intersect the baseline of the square projected out, and you can see right there where they meet at point D. So now you can see that the distance from A to D is going to be the same as the distance from A to C, right?
Right.
See that? Okay.
Yep.
That ratio is the square root of 2. So now from there we can generate a rectangle. Now this rectangle, long side is square root of 2, short side is 1. Now, on a building site in the ancient times, you would have had, let me go back to this. Let's say you've got your square laid out on the ground, and you have a stake or a pole driven in at A, and you have a chain or a knotted rope that's stretched to C, and then you can actually inscribe this right on the ground. And that's how they would have done it, to lay out the template for the building that is about to be constructed. So now, once you've got that rectangle, the square root of 2, I can show you many examples of the root 2 in art, architecture, in nature, and so on. Okay, the next step within this sequence of dynamic symmetry is to put that diagonal in. Now, again, you can use the Pythagorean theorem, which tells you that the square of the short side of any right triangle plus the square of the long side equals the square of the hypotenuse.
Okay.
So let's look, ADC is a right triangle. This length is the hypotenuse. So if you square CD and you square AD, you add them together and take the square root, you're going to get the length of AC. And that turns out to be go through this. I'm just showing, this is what we do in class. I show people how to construct these. Now here's what happens. We take the perpendicular to the diagonal and we get BE. Now did you see how I got this point right here? We can back up. It's not too important you see that right now. But if you put in the diagonal, and then I draw a circle like this, and notice that the circle radius is the same as the side length of the rectangle. Okay?
Right.
Now I take this distance here, and I will take this length from here to here, and let's see, did I call, okay, AF, and now I bisect AF in this manner, and when I do that, I get this perpendicular from here to here, and that splits the base of this rectangle right here, right in the middle. And as a result of that, what happens is I get a series of these scale invariant triangles. And I can go through this whole, they all have the same proportions, And then ultimately, what happens is I get 2 duplicates of the original. There we go. Let's see. And I can create what are called the whirling rectangles. And these whirling rectangles are showing actually a vortex phenomena that we can find in nature.
Right.
Again, we get into all of this in the classes, and you'll notice the symmetries that are starting to appear there as we develop this sequence.
You're melting my brain already, Randall.
Good. This is what we want. We want Danny's brain to be melted.
Hand me those salts.
And so what we got here now is one of the things that makes them dynamic is the fact that these rectangles are infinitely replicable, either growing or reducing. So look what I've got here. Now you can see here that rectangle in blue is the exact proportions of the original rectangle. See that?
Yes.
Look at there. There it's going around. And I can continue by creating a series. I can create a grid. And this grid is scale invariant, meaning it's self-similar.
Right.
Right? And this is one of the key ideas of sacred geometry is the self-similarity of these forms, which means that if you're creating a composition, let's say you're an artist and you're created a painting that's the canvas ratio is a root 2 rectangle we're just looking at here. Well, you can divide this root 2 rectangle up, just as I've shown you here, so that all of the parts reflect the proportions of the whole. Now you have what the Greeks called stereometry, which is this relationship, harmonic relationship between the whole composition and its mathematics, its proportions, and the parts. So like if you look at this, you can see that within this, I'm showing here, these are dynamic points within it. And those dynamic points are kind of like where the energy is happening, see? Because if you connect these points here, what you've got is another root 2 rectangle. And now, let's say you create a template using a root 2 grid. You now lay out your composition of your painting or your building, whatever it might be, on this template. Now, you don't see the template, but you intuitively grasp that there's this harmonic relationship between part and whole, and this was one of the secret techniques taught to architects and artists in the Middle Ages.
Okay.
And you can see here, you can take this down to an infinite degree of precision, or you can keep going with it. So I take that diagonal in the root 2 rectangle, and I repeat the process, and I get a root 3 rectangle, and I can do the same thing, except now when I erect that perpendicular to the diagonal, what I do is I've split the root 3 rectangle into a series of 3 smaller root 3 rectangles that all have the proportions of the whole. And you can see now I'm drawing in diagonals to reveal the symmetries, the hidden symmetries within it. And then we can proceed as before to establish a template, a grid. Whoa. And then once we've done that, we have this infinitely replicable geometry. So yeah, following are some simple examples of few patterns and designs that can be developed from the relations of dynamic symmetry. The possibilities and variations are literally without limit. So this is just going to show you some of the stuff that, you can begin.
Now, how does all this relate to time?
Well, see,
how is that segue?
We get numbers. We get key numbers. Like, for example, look here. Here's you just ask a question. Look at this.
What are we looking at here?
We're looking at a large multi-ring cosmic impact structure.
Is this the Yucatan?
Yes, it's the Yucatan. And when you have a multi-ring structure, the spacing ratio of the rings is root 2. Remember when I first showed you the concentric circles?
Yes.
That's what you're looking at right here, concentric circles that are in that ratio. So when you have a high energy, hypervelocity impact, it melts the target rock, turns it into a liquid. You have your rings emanating from the point of impact. As they're moving outwards, they're cooling, they're crystallizing, and eventually they freeze into a solid. It's the root 2 spacing ratio. And there's some examples. Mare Orientale on the lunar impact crater, and there you can see the root 2 spacing ratio superimposed.
Whoa.
So yeah, I mean, and again, this is something that we're rushing through it, and the way you really learn this is hands-on. So when I teach this in a course,
Right.
I have everybody are drawing this. Now in the new course I'm developing, I've kicked it up a notch because I'm also showing how to do all of this digitally. So if you work in a CAD program or some type of graphics design program, I'm showing how you would use this as a design tool, not only in the classical way of compass and straight edge, but also doing it digitally.
Okay.
And so you're going to see here, I'm going to do this very quick. This is the transcendental root ratios are formed by the ratios of successive diagonals. And we're creating a series of ratios here that we see harmonic progression. Whatever the measure of the radius of the inner circle, successive radii are measured by the sequence of root ratios times the original radius. And so this is like the geometric harmony of ancient metrology, unifying geometry applied to temple building all over the ancient world. So the Mayamata, which is an ancient Hindu manual of architectural design, says if the measurement of the temple is in every way perfect, there will be perfection in the universe as well. Man is the measure of all things, said Protagoras. Isaiah, who hath measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, and meted out heaven with the span, and comprehended the dust of the earth in a measure, and weighed the mountains in scales and the hills in a balance. You'll find this in a lot of sacred traditions, this idea of measurement in metrology. Here's the visions of Ezekiel. In the visions of God, he brought me, now this is the prophet Ezekiel, right?
Right.
And this is very consistent when you look at the stories of the prophets. Okay, what's happening here? In the visions of God, he brought me into the land of Israel and set me upon a very high mountain, by which was the frame of a city on the south. And he brought me thither, and behold, there was a man whose appearance was like the appearance of brass, with a line of flax in his hand and a measuring reed. And he stood in the gate. And the man said unto me, Son of man, behold with thine eyes, and hear with thine ears, and set thine heart upon all that I shall show thee. Because this was the key. Now you can see this is the beginning now of his prophetic vision. This man with the measuring line in his hand and a line of flax, right? Because that gives you your plumb, and then you've got your measuring reed. So this is the basis for laying out the sacred structure, the temple. So what you're seeing here is that this is what's preceding Ezekiel's prophetic vision, is encountering this man with the line of flax and the measuring reed in his hand. And he's telling Ezekiel, says, behold, with your eyes, listen with your ears, and set thine heart upon all that I will show thee, because what I'm about to reveal to you is the pattern of all creation. And once having beheld that pattern of all creation, you will now be endowed with prophetic vision. Because you asked me about time. Well, here's the thing. All these numbers govern the tempo, the tempos, the cosmic tempos.
Right.
Right?
That's
if you
a mind
understand
fuck.
the cosmic tempos, you are now in a position to understand what has happened before and what is going to happen, because you understand the cycles. Zechariah. This is a good one. I lifted up mine eyes again and looked, and behold, a man with a measuring line in his hand. Then I said, Whither goest thou? And he said unto me, To measure Jerusalem, to see what is the breadth thereof and what is the length thereof.
Right.
Now, why is it important to see the length and the breadth of the holy city, the sacred city that represents the manifestation of the cosmic heavens on the earth? Well, again, it's like, because that's the beginning of seeing and understanding and comprehending the cosmic pattern of creation.
And was it Jerusalem that it was measured in the actual size of it times a certain sacred number actually measured the circumference of the earth?
We can talk about that in a minute, yes.
Okay. Sorry for my layman interjections, but...
Well, we're getting you there, Dan.
okay. Yeah, you are. You guys are holding my hand and walking me through it.
From the New Testament, And there was given me a reed like unto a rod, and the angel stood, saying, Rise and measure the temple of God, and the altar, and them that worship therein. Now, what do you think that St. John the Divine is going to discover or learn when he measures the temple, the altar, and them that worship? Is that there is a common measurement, a common system of proportion that unites all of them. From the person, the worshiper, to the altar itself, to the temple itself. Now, what is not mentioned here is that you can expand that to the earth itself. And from the earth to the solar system, and from that to the cosmos. You could also go in the other direction, if you've got the ability. So then I show historic metrology, which is showing like the Egyptian remen, an Egyptian unit of linear measure analyzed by F.H. Griffith in 1892, and by William Flinders Petrie and A.E. Berriman, considered to be equal to 20 digits or 14.58 inches. A.E. Berriman, in his work Historical Metrology, refined the length of the remen to be 1.2165. So if you take this calculator, Danny,
Right.
put in 1.2165. Now that'll be in feet. That's the length of the remen. So you can see that it's a little bit, now this is an ancient Egyptian unit of measurement.
The remen.
The remen. It's
Okay.
a little bit longer than our foot, right?
Right.
Okay, so now there was another unit of measurement used in Egypt called the royal cubit. It was discovered by Isaac Newton in his analysis of the dimensions of the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid based upon the survey of Greaves in 1637, which, in fact, I'm sure you were well aware of. Also mentioned in the writings of Herodotus in his description of the city of Babylon. With slight variations, the accepted length of the royal cubit is taken as 1.72 feet or 20.6265. Now put in 1.72.
Am I clearing out the 1.26?
No, leave that. Actually, okay, here's what you're going to divide by 1.72,
1.72.
right?
Okay.
Now, you see there's a little 1 over X button?
Oh, no, I hit equals.
Okay, you got to hit equals.
Okay, let me try this again.
Okay, let's go back. Let's go back to this.
1.2.
Put in 14.58 inches.
Okay,
Okay.
got it.
Now divide by 20.6265
Okay.
equals, what'd you get?
0.70685.
Okay, so now do you see the 1 over X? Because we're going to flip the ratio. The 1 over X button. It should be
It's a button. Got it. Let's see. 1 over X.
third row.
Yep, got
second
it.
column. Hit that button.
Okay.
What'd you get?
1.414711934.
Okay, 1.414 basically.
Yes.
All right. Now, right to the right of that button, you'll see X squared. Hit
Got
that
it.
button. What'd you get?
2.0014.
So what you're looking at is the square root of 2. So what you just did, Danny, was you showed that the ratio of the royal cubit, the remen to the royal cubit, so the Egyptians knew this. If they drew a square, which was 1 remen on the side, and you drew its diagonal, the diagonal was the royal cubit.
For all of the time that we have been alive, the US dollar has been the primary currency, but that may not be the case for much longer. China is set to dethrone the dollar, and possibly much sooner than you think. And even the world's biggest economies are already ditching the dollar for the yen, collapsing the US currency, causing unprecedented inflation and crashing markets. And if that wasn't enough, this paves the way for the government to take total control over all of your money with a new digital dollar. Now is the time to take total control of your money and not let your life savings become a casualty of the currency wars. And you can do it using the only precious metal dealer that I trust, American Hartford Gold. They will show you how to protect your savings and retirement accounts by diversifying your wealth portfolio into physical gold and silver. With the finest products, amazing customer service, and a buyback commitment. But you don't have to take my word for it. American Hartford Gold has a 5-star rating from thousands of reviews and an A+ from the Better Business Bureau. American Hartford Gold supports content like this that is committed to bringing you the truth. And if you tell them I sent you, they'll give you up to $5,000 in free silver on your first order. So call them now. Click on the link in the description or call 855-679-1326. That's 855-679-1326 or text CONCRETE, KONCRETE, to 65532. Again, the phone number is 855-679-1326. 26 or text concrete to 65532. Now back to the show.
So that exercise we just went through, you draw a square and it's one Riemann, which is, as it says here, say 14.58 inches.
Okay.
Its diagonal is going to be the royal cubit. And that was the basis of their measuring system, was that dynamic relationship of a square and its diagonal. Now, the royal cubit was used, like I said, by Newton in his analysis of the King's Chamber. Of the King's Chamber. It's also the thickness of the socle.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That the pyramid sits on. Well, then, if we jump forward, the Palestinian cubit, the knowledge of the Palestinian cubit survives in the writings of Epiphanius, a bishop of Constantia in Cyprus, who wrote a treatise on weights and measures in AD 392. It conforms to the cubit of the altar, as mentioned in Ezekiel 43:13. That is, the cubit and the hand's breadth. The Palestinian cubit is generally taken as 25.284. Put 25.284 in your calculator, and I'll do the same here. 25.284.
Got it.
Now we're going to divide that by the Riemann, which is 14.58. And hit equals. Now hit your x squared key.
3.
3. So it's the square root of 3. So in other words, imagine this now. Now the Palestinian cubit is used roughly in Palestine area about 1,000 years after the royal cubit and Riemann are being used in Egypt. Picture now, you start with a Riemann, you draw a square. Take its diagonal, that gives you the royal cubit. Use that to get your root 2 rectangle and take its diagonal. That diagonal is now the Palestinian cubit.
Got it.
Got it?
Got it.
So now we've got the Roman pace, the origin of the Roman mile. Now, you know the mile comes from the pace, right? You know what a pace is?
That's just like a human walking?
A human walking. Now imagine if you're going to pace out, you've got a field and you want to know roughly how big it is. You don't have a measuring tape. You figure, oh, it's about an acre, but I'm going to pace it out.
Yeah.
Well, if it's in the old days and you're a surveyor or a builder, an architect, you're going to know pretty precisely the length of your pace, because that's a common way of determining land measure, is you pace things out initially. Mm-hmm. You know, we didn't have transits and builders, instruments back then. We used things like ropes and chains. And
back then, what are we talking about back then?
Anywhere before, from a few 150, 200 years ago.
Okay.
All the way back.
Okay.
Pacing something out.
Okay.
How many paces? Now, if you're pacing something out, you know that you're going to quickly learn that it's much easier if you are counting every other step than every step, right? You don't count left, right, you go right, 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 and you count, say, every time your right foot hits the ground. Okay, now, if you do 1,000 of those, that was the origin of the mile.
We've been using the mile for that long?
Oh, mile goes back. Everybody, you find the mile, think about this, 1,000 paces. So you had a Roman mile, which was 1,000 paces in Rome. Now, think of the word mile and think of the word mill, which means 1,000.
1,000, that's right, millennium, yeah.
Yeah, like a millennium.
A
millimeter, 1,000th of a meter.
Ah, okay.
So that's the origin. The mile and the mill, it's 1,000. So the original meaning of the mile was 1,000 paces. Now, our mile, how many feet are in our mile, Danny? I'm holding you conspicuous before the entire world at this moment.
1,000.
1,000 feet?
I don't know. Let me guess.
Somebody, do you have your ruler?
10,000?
That boy needs his wrists.
10,000?
Hey,
I failed algebra.
Delivering any of that.
Ben?
I will claim the metric system, unfortunately, as the basis for my education.
Oh, no. We can cut
I have
Ben
a
some
small get-out-of-jail
slack
card free.
here. Okay. Now this is
He's got an excuse. I don't.
our fathers and our grandfathers all knew this, I think. Certainly farmers and builders and people like that who lived close to the land knew that our mile is 5,280 feet.
Oh, okay.
Now, if you divide 5,280 feet by 1,000, you'll get the length of the pace upon which our mile that we use today is based, right? So 5,280 feet, divide that by 1,000. That means that each pace was
5.28.
5.28. Very good. Right. 5.28 feet. You should, if you had your notebook there in class, I would be getting you to write that down.
5.28.
5.28. Okay, you got it. 5.28. Now you look at the Roman pace here, and it's equal to 4.86 feet.
So they were shorter.
They were shorter. You got it. Now our mile is part of the imperial system that goes back to ancient Britain. Now, I've looked at the surveys of Stonehenge, for example, and if you take the big outer ring of sarsen stone circles, within a few inches, it's 105.6 feet in diameter, right? And if you look at the sarsen stone uprights, which are the big stones forming that outer circle, that ring, there are lintels on top.
Mm-hmm.
And those lintels are an average length of 10.56 feet. 10.56 times 10 is 105.6. Think about that. Okay, so if you were to draw a ring on the ground, a circular ring that's 105.6 feet in diameter, Stonehenge would fit within a few inches within that ring. Now, the fact that they were using a consistent unit of measure is verified or confirmed by the fact that the distance, if you go around that ring,
Right.
and there's 30 uprights, which are most of the surveys and studies assume that there was originally 30 of those uprights, and several of the lintels, the horizontal lintels that cap those uprights are still in place. Their average length is 10.56 feet. So think 10.56 times 10 gives you that ring.
Okay.
Okay, got that?
Got it.
Now what's 105.6 times 100?
105.6 times 100.
No, times 50, I'm sorry.
528. 5,280.
Our mile.
What the fuck?
Yeah. So what does that suggest? It doesn't prove, but it suggests that the builders of Stonehenge were using a system of measurement from which we derive our mile.
When do we think Stonehenge was built?
Well, it's Neolithic.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking like, I think it's, what, 5,000 BC or somewhere like that, or maybe even earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's old.
At least Neolithic. I mean,
At least Neolithic.
Yeah.
So at least 4,500 to 5,000 years ago. At least, if not older.
Yeah.
Okay.
This suggests that our mile is that old. And they were using, if they had a mile of 5,280 feet, and you divide that by exactly 50, they now draw a ring on the ground, and that's the diameter of the sarsen stone circle at Stonehenge. And you divide that by 10, and that gives you the average spacing of the sarsen stone uprights. So,
Wow.
yeah, that's
bizarre.
now these are the kind of things we look at in the course that I do. Okay, so
Okay.
when we look at the Roman pace, which is basically almost Middle Eastern, right? It's, in Italy, not Middle Eastern, but it's Mediterranean. We'll call it Mediterranean. We're looking at roughly 2,000 years ago when the Roman pace was and in Rome, it was well known that you had the city center, and the Roman mile was 1,000 paces out from the city center. Okay, so if we look at here, 1/1000th of the Roman mile is equal to 8 stades of 607.5 feet. Now that stade is where we get our term stadium from.
Yeah.
Oh,
Right?
really?
Yeah. Now, a stadium was the distance around, so the British version of the stadium was called the furlong. And we don't know how old the furlong is, but it was apparently very ancient. Now, the only place that I know of where furlongs are still used today is where, Ben?
Racetracks.
Yeah,
right?
racetracks.
Oh, horse racetracks.
Yeah. Yeah. But the furlong to the ancient Britons was 660 feet. 660 feet is 1/8 of a mile. Try it. 660 times 8. See if you get 5,280.
5,280.
There you go. So a furlong was 1/8 of a mile. What's the origin of the furlong? I don't know. It's old. But see, that's more confirmation that the mile that we use today has ancient roots. Now here's something else that's interesting. We talked earlier about the Earth that we live on is an oblate spheroid.
Indeed.
And we know, as Ben was talking about, the equatorial diameter is 26 miles greater than the polar diameter.
Right.
Right? It varies from...
Now, why is that?
It's spinning. Think about any spinning system. The centrifugal force is going to throw the mass of it towards the equator of the spin. And thank that God that it does, because otherwise conditions on the surface of the Earth would be so chaotic that it's highly doubtful that any kind of higher life ever could have evolved.
So if the Earth was a perfect sphere spinning, how would that disrupt the Earth? How would that disrupt everything, like the Earth's crust, the oceans?
Well, there would be, this equatorial bulge acts as a stabilizing flywheel.
Okay.
Right? And the Earth is not perfectly rigid. But it's interesting that you said if the Earth was a perfect sphere. If the Earth was a perfect sphere, what would be the measure of that sphere that would then have the same volume as the actual Earth? Well, the actual Earth varies from 7,926 miles at the equator, 7,900 miles at the polar diameter, so a difference of 26 miles. So what that means is that if you're standing at the equator, you're 13 miles farther away from this Earth's center than if you were standing at the North or South Pole.
Right.
And it also, you can think of it this way, if you traveled from the equator to one of the poles, you're going downhill 13 miles.
Oh my
Right?
God.
Right? Now let's think about this. Okay, so what would be, I'm glad you brought up the idea of the perfect sphere, because again, when we're talking about creation manifest in 3 dimensions, and the idea of sacred geometry is that behind the actual manifested 3-dimensional physical universe is this template, the template of geometry. In that template of geometry, you've got idealized numbers, okay? Now, the idealized number of the Earth would be what you just said. What would be the size of the Earth that was a perfect sphere, let's say, that had the same volume as the actual Earth?
Yes.
It would be 7,920 miles.
If we squished it into a perfect sphere.
If it was a perfect sphere,
Okay.
same volume as the actual Earth, 7,920. Get that number in your
I'm
head.
going to write that down. 7,920.
7,920.
Okay.
Got that number in your
Got
head? Okay. Let's go back to the furlong that we were talking about. Okay? Furlong, we agreed, was 1/8 of a mile, 660 feet. How many inches in 660 feet?
It's going to be the same number.
7920. What the fuck kind of sorcery is this? Whoa.
Now let's think of what we just saw here. Okay, we said the Earth, 7,920 miles, right? We've already determined that the mile is a human-derived unit of measurement based upon paces. You go and you walk out 1,000 paces on the surface of the Earth, and it's 5,280 feet.
Whoever developed the mile knew the circumference of the Earth.
Well, I'm not going to go make that claim, but there's something weird going on here. Now, picture, there's 2 things. When you say that the mile is 5,280 feet, each of those paces is 5.28 feet. So think you've got a ratio. The ratio is the length of the human pace to the human foot. That's ultimately the ratio of our mile. The pace to the foot, 5.28 feet, and 1,000 of those paces is our mile that we use today.
Come on.
Key number, that
Come
ratio,
on,
5.28 feet. Okay? You got to keep that in mind. And I know that, you have to work with these numbers for a while before they become embedded as part of your consciousness, part of your framework, your conceptual framework of reality. You just saw that the furlong, 7,920 inches. So think of this. You've got a furlong, 660 feet. Let's say you lay that out on the ground, and I have actually done this. Find a nice big open field or parking lot, lay out 660 feet.
Pebble?
Then you mark out 1 inch, which, oh, by the way, is the width of your thumb originally, your digit. That's where the inch comes from, right? Put your thumb on a piece of paper, draw a hit on either side. You've got your inch. That's a derivation of the inch. So all of this is connecting human anatomy. You've got your inch. You've got your foot. You've got your pace. You've got your cubit, right? So now this is all linking the geometry to the human anatomy. So now, here's the final thing that you want to get in your mind, the relationship. The furlong is to the inch as the earth is to a mile. Got it?
Got it.
Okay, let's go further with this. Are you ready? I mean, this is, we're just kind of like got one leg down into the rabbit hole. What I like to do is I like to get people that they put one leg in, then 2 legs, and while they're peering down, I come up behind them and I give them a push.
Ooh. Let's go.
There you go. Okay, so in the book of Revelation, we were talking about the prophecy. There, St. John the Divine, he's met with the angel with the line of flax and the measuring reed, and he's got to measure the holy city and all of this. Then later on, it's describing his vision of the holy city. And it says, the city lieth 4 square, and the length and the height and the breadth of it are equal. What would that suggest to you? 4 square, but that's got length, it's got height, and it's got breadth.
Cube.
Cube. A cube.
Okay.
12,000 furlongs. And the city lieth 4 square, and the length and the height and the breadth of it are equal 12,000 furlongs. Okay? How far is that? Put 12,000 in, and we know that a furlong is 660 feet. So go 12,000 furlongs.
7,920,000.
Now just look at the first 4 digits.
7920.
Does that look familiar?
Yes.
Yes. So now that's a lot of feet. Let's put that into some ratio.
That's the Earth.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's the measure of the earth times 1,000. Now let's put that, but that's feet. We just converted that to feet.
Got it. Okay. That's why it's so much.
But who can picture what's 7,920,000 feet? Let's convert that to miles.
Okay.
So you're going to divide by 5,280.
1,500.
1,500 miles. Now, what's the ratio between that and the actual Earth? So here's what you've already got that in your calculator, right?
1,500. Yep.
So that'll put 1,500 on top, divide by Earth, 7,920 on the bottom. Now you're going to flip that by hitting 1 over x, so that you put the big number on top and the small number on bottom.
Okay, I just did the divided. It gave me 0.18.
Okay, and then hit 1 over x.
Okay, 1 over x. 5.28. What in the fuck is this, Randall?
Okay, so
It's all connected.
yeah. In other words, there's a whole set of ratios and proportions
Yes.
embedded in creation itself. And whether we're talking sacred scripture and prophecy, whether we're talking architecture, whether we're talking art, whether we're talking growing things, whether we're talking about the great temporal relationships, time cycles, we're going to find the same numbers, the same ratios at work. So this was sort of your introduction
Okay.
into the sacred architecture of reality. When you begin to see these connections across time and space from one level of phenomena to another level of phenomena. And it was the basis for prophecy. And here's why. If everybody you knew only had a memory that went back 6 months, But you had a memory that went back a full year or more, so that you saw and you knew. Like, imagine this. I use this analogy in the whole climate change scam that's going on.
Okay.
If you started tracking climate change, and you started looking at daily temperatures, and you had no memory of what came before, and you started keeping your temperatures on March 1st, and then you go through March every day. Some days it'll be a little warmer, other days it'll be a little cooler, but by the time you get to April, May, June, you're going to see a definite upward trend, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you don't have any memory of before March 1st, you're going to think, oh my God, this temperature that I'm seeing now in June is unprecedented. But somebody comes along whose memory goes for multiple years, and I say, well, no, this is normal. This is part of the normal cycle, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the difference between that let's say, whose memory only goes back to March 1st, and this other person who knows that it's cyclical, who knows that, yeah, it's going to get hot. It'll be hot in August. And then guess what? It's going to start cooling off again. And then by December and January, the world is going to be your world that you inhabit here is going to be a very different place. That person is a prophet. The prophet is the person that knows the grand cycles and knows where we are in those cycles, and therefore they are able to say, yes, in the future, this is going to happen. Now, say, for example, I grew up in Minnesota. Okay, so every year it's like, when is the first freeze going to occur? When is the first thaw going to occur in the spring? Well, we don't know the exact date and time, but we certainly know the window, right? The same with prophecy. You know, you're not necessarily going to know the exact date and time that something is going to happen, but you're going to certainly know the window of probability within which that's going to happen.
Right.
And that's what separates the prophet is the person that has the long view and understands the cycles and where we are within those cycles. So if you're in Minnesota, I guess the date would be for the first freeze would probably be somewhere around mid-October. So as you're coming up the second week in October, the prophet is going to know that first day of freezing is imminent. They may not know the exact date and time, but they know it's imminent.
Mm-hmm.
See.
And that is echoed throughout history, going back to as far back as like the implications that of this sacred geometry and some of the oldest structures that we found. Basically, it implies that they understood this long history.
Yes, that's what I would read into it. Yes, that somewhere what this is showing, and I mean we've just scratched the surface of this.
Right.
I think what it's showing us is that somebody back whenever, and I would trace it right back into prehistory, had a very sophisticated knowledge of the architecture of creation. And they understood not only the spatial relationships, but the temporal relationships as well. And they were able to apply that in terms of sacred building, in terms of a technology. Because it turns out, see, that the plasma energies, when you transition from a plasma to a plasmoid, what it is you are now confining the erratic see, when you go from solid, you've got electrons and neutrons bound tightly together.
Right.
Go to a liquid, they're still bound, but there's a much greater degree of freedom. Go to gas, they're still bound, but now you've got even greater degrees of freedom. What if you ramp up the energy even a little to the next step? Well, now you've got a complete disassociation between electron and neutron. Your neutron is now just an ion, and now everything is completely free to move. How do you now begin to exploit that or utilize that? Is you create containment fields. Those containment fields are governed by sacred geometry. And I think there we're looking now at the key to understanding what an ancient system of technology that a civilization could have been built upon. Maybe. Now this is hypothesis, definitely I think warrants further testing. But we're interested in a very interesting time now because now we have the potential to actually test it.
Right.
And it is being tested as we speak.
That's a lot.
Look at the stuff Ben has been.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you explain that? You know, you can't really. You have to dismiss it. And isn't that what pretty much the critics are doing?
Well, yeah. It depends which element of it, but in general, it's a head in the sand kind of approach and dismissing it. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, logical fallacies notwithstanding, that's what happens. But this is why I'm interested in it from like a perspective of, could this have been a potential root of a technology that was used, because we're seeing the same system. We're seeing this employment of these principles, these sacred geometric principles, in the architecture, in the artifacts, and then when you see it employed in what is a potential technology, there's an alignment there. Like, it's like, all right, so they were clearly aware of and deploying these principles in their works, and it was like a fundamental building block of what they were doing. We see it in the sites, we see it in the temples, we see it in the objects like vases, and then we see evidence for some form of technology. And now it looks like there's a technology that's potentially being rediscovered that is built using these same principles that we see employed in other aspects of these ancient cultures. Like, that's it's hard to just say, well, that's just pure coincidence. I mean, it's
And some of these vases that you've discovered, I mean, is it true that it would take a very sophisticated computer to replicate some of these things, the symmetry?
It's a bit more complex than that. So since we last talked on the vases, the vases have always been fascinating, right? These pre-dynastic objects, and you can eyeball and look at ancient artifacts and see elements of precision, but you're just looking at it. We don't truly know until we measure things. This is, Rand was talking about metrology. It's the science of measurement. And since we last talked, that's exactly what's happened. We had finally had the chance to actually get our hands on some of these artifacts and start employing some of the best metrological systems, like structured light scanning, even now in MRI and CT machine scanning, which allows us to look at these objects, create models of them that are accurate down to the micrometer, or with structured lights like thousandths of an inch. And if you're looking for a comparative measurement, like a human hair is between 2 and 3 thousandths of an inch thick. So we're like less than half the width of a human hair, like accurate to this. And then a micrometer is like a 25th of a thousandth. So we're measuring right down to extremely high tolerances. And then, so once you've got that model, you can start to do analysis on it and figure out, well, what's the geometry, what are the patterns we're seeing in this? What is the relationship and accuracy of different elements in this vase? So, long story short, we found that they're incredibly accurate in terms of the geometric relationship of different parts of the vase relative to the others. And
right.
We can dive into sort of specifically what that means, but how it ties into kind of what we've been talking about is that we had once we created this model, we sort of looked initially at the metrology of it and said, this is sort of astonishingly well made in terms of, like, the vase itself is oblate. Like, you can't it's not like it doesn't conform to a regular shape, so you can't really do measurement on it. So what you have to do is match geometric shapes to different parts of the vase. So at the top, we're matching like a flat plane to the top of the vase. And in a CMM, or coordinate measurement system application, we can then say, okay, yeah, and it is also based on how many points of reference you use to match it. So you could do it with 5 points of reference, which isn't going to give you a really accurate measurement. But with these high definition models, we're using 70, 80,000 points of measurement. So it's that flat plane that we match to, say, the top of a vase. It's a very accurate representation of the top of the vase. But then we can look at it and say, okay, so how flat is it? So we're looking at these vases, it's within 1 or 2 thousandths of an inch of being perfectly flat. But once we've got that top of the vase, you can kind of now use that as a comparison or a relative measurement for other parts of the vase. So you have now, like, think of it as an x-axis. You've got the top of the vase, gives you your x-axis. And we looked at the vase and we said, well, let's match, say, a cylinder. You're matching regular geometric shapes to parts of the vase, things like cones, cylinders, spheres, toroids, things like that. So in the neck of the vase, so you have the top, you've got the mouth of the vase, we can fit a cylinder to the mouth of the vase. And you, again, using 60,000 points of reference, so it's very accurate. You can now do geometric operations on that cylinder. You can look at, okay, how cylindrical is it? Like how perfectly does that vase neck represent that shape? And again, you're within, single digits of a thousandth. But then, this is where it got interesting on the metrology, is you can now look at, all right, so because it's a cylinder, we can define the center line. We know where the center line is. How perpendicular is that center line relative to the top of the vase? Think of that as like a y-axis, I guess, or a z-axis. And turns out we're within, again, like a single thousandth of an inch, so it's almost perfectly perpendicular. And from there, we stepped out, and I can show you slides in this if we want to maybe get into some of the detail here, but you can then match things like the bottom of the vase matches a part of a sphere using like 80,000 points of reference. You can define where the center point of that sphere is and then match it against the center line of the vase. And that's where sort of some of the precision in this object really started to shine, because it's, you're within these single digit thousandths of an inch, which tells you a lot of things about the accuracy of how it was made, the regularity of the shapes, and it's just leagues beyond anything that is achievable by hand. I mean, we're talking about tolerances that aren't really perceivable by hand or eye, and it's stuff that's done in rose granite, and it's remarkable engineering. But that was kind of just the beginning of the rabbit hole of what happened after that, because we released and I'm happy we can go through those that detail. I think when we talk the next day.
Yep.
So what we did then is we released the model. We sort of open sourced this data, and we said, all right, so we've found some remarkable aspects of this vase. Here's the STL. You can go to my website, download this model of the vase, and do this analysis for yourself. And we had a Danish cryptographer download it, and he started looking for patterns in the vase. And he's a mathematician and cryptographer, and he started to find some really remarkable things. And this is where the sort of the sacred geometry element comes in. So he was looking for geometric patterns in it. So he discovered a number of things. Firstly, by finding out that some of the patterns that are related or drawn from these sacred geometric exercises, things that Randall was showing, one of those is something called the Flower of Life grid. It's a series of interlocked circles. Mm-hmm. And he found that elements of the vase were derived or could be matched to Flower of Life grids. There's a couple of different sizes, like the inner diameter of the vase, and then the top and the bottom of the vase, and the outer diameter of the vase all match. There's two different Flower of Life grids that it matches. It was kind of like a starting point. And then he found that like a primary unit of measure that seems to have been involved in the design of the vase is the radian. So a 1 radian angle, which is it's a simple way to radians is an easy way to represent an angle. It's a little more elegant than the way we use 360 degrees. Mm-hmm. It's if you take a circle, you take its radius, you apply the length of that radius to the circumference of a circle, you like cut that out. The angle that it forms in the center of the circle is a 1 radian angle. So you have half a circle is essentially pi radians. So and there's 2 pi radians in a circle. So you can express any angle as a fraction or as a part of a number of radians, right?
Right.
So the 1 radian angle is used to derive a number of features on the vase: the placement of the handles, the dimensions and the curvatures of the sides of the vase at the top and the bottom. It's a fundamental principle in its construction. Further than that, he found that all of the curvatures of the vase, and now you're talking about curves like, because these vases are shaped like this, right there. So all of the curves are essentially, sections of circles. They're like, the circle's kind of the main primitive that's used in its construction. And all of the curves in the various different little places on the handles, at the base of the vase, at the top of the vase, and at the neck. You're talking about circles or sections of circles that have radii measuring from 42 millimeters at the high end down to like 1.1 millimeters at the bottom end. So you're talking about a circle with a radius of just over a millimeter. All of those radii of specifically those circles, the radii of those circles, they all match a specific algorithm that he discovered in this vase, and it's only those radii that match this. Something he called the radial traversal pattern. So it's every curvature that's used in the vase was only, it all matches a single algorithm. If there were different sized radiuses, they wouldn't match this pattern. We don't see that. So each of these curvatures are related to each other through this single algorithm. Effectively, what you could do is represent the vase mathematically with this algorithm. So we thought, that's interesting, right? So we went into CAD, and he said, let's create a vase model based purely on this algorithm. So let's build one from scratch, just using this algorithm, and then compare it to the model of the vase. So he did this, and then he compared the model of the vase to this model that he'd created just using the radial traversal pattern. The median deviation of measurements between the vase and the pattern that he'd created using the mathematics was something like 2 micrometers.
Whoa.
So it was, yeah, so this is it. If you scroll down, abstraction set in granite. Yeah, if you scroll down a little bit.
Did I see a vesica there?
Holy this is what you were showing us earlier,
Yeah.
Randall.
Yeah, if you keep going, I think this is the second article that he wrote. So this is the radial traversal pattern. These are the radii of these circles that fit it. And so you can essentially, what Mark found, this is Mark's article, and I'm happy to show more detail onto this. I'm just trying to, Mark Kvist, he's the Danish cryptographer who did the work on it. So it's you have a couple things to consider here. One is that there's like 12 degrees of mathematical interrelationship between the curvatures that are used. So the different sizes of circles and those radiuses that are used to construct a vase. And there are, it's only those. Like if you had different sized curves, like different circles that were used to create the curves, it wouldn't fit this pattern. We wouldn't see it. It's not an accident. This thing, it seems like, and you can express the vase mathematically, and it matches. And if you scroll down a bit, he talks about the median deviation. Go up a little. So yeah, so it's the median radial deviation is 9 micrometers. So that's the comparison between the CAD generated model that's built on maths and the actual vase model, which is basically, you're talking now in measurements that we don't know if it's imperfections in the vase or imperfections in the scan, because we're down close to the tolerance of the scan itself. This is, it's really remarkable. Now, what's interesting about that and the implication for a potential design process is like, okay, so if you can admit that this thing was designed, it's not an accident. You don't get 12 degrees of mathematical interrelationship as an accident in this vessel. We can reverse engineer its features to show that there's an equation that can be used to demonstrate the vase. So maybe it was designed mathematically. So how do you do this? How do you go from a design to output? Now, can you design this vase on paper? You might be able to. Like, you could probably draw it out. If the paper was the size of this room, you could scale it up. But you try drawing. Imagine trying to draw a circle or a curvature of a circle that has a radius of 1.1 millimeters. You can't do that, right?
No.
And even if you draw it out on a piece of paper, you've still got to scale that thing down to somehow generate an output. And remember, we have measured this vase. It's made out of rose granite. It's incredibly precise in its manufacturing, right? So it's not something that's achievable by hand. Whatever system was used to manufacture it requires, it's even if you grant them the use of the lathe, it's not a simple lathe. This is a lathe that has to have, very precise bearings and rods and set screws and things like this. Like this, you're also working in granite. There's all these forces involved in trying to work this type of stone to get it down to and to create it this precisely to a degree that matches just the mathematical model that precisely. The real trick is actually how do you produce output from this design? And I think Mark's quote in this article is excellent that talks about it. There's really, across all of nature, I mean, there's only one phenomena that we know that can do this type of thing, which can take an input, can take a design, it can take input, It can operate and do operations on state, and then translate, like basically do something and then provide an output. We don't know of any natural phenomena that can do this of people or animals or anything like that. It's the only thing that does this type of operation is a Turing machine. And Turing machines are something that, I mean, today we call them computers, but you can make Turing machines mechanically, pneumatically, hydraulically, electronically, which is how we do it. Yeah.
So we could create something this perfect today if we wanted to.
I think if we put out, it's one of the challenges that's out there. I would love to see somebody make this. Some of the people that say, "Oh, this is a modern fake," I'm like, well, it seems to have been very well made if that's the case, and it's also got all these mathematical principles that are behind it. I'd love to see somebody try and make this down to the level of precision that we see in the vase itself. But it seems like it would have required, I mean, this is Mark's conclusion on this article, is it would have required a Turing machine to create this thing. There's no other way of doing it. In fact, if you scroll down...
How many vases have been measured to this degree of accuracy?
So that's a good question, yeah. So we've really talked mostly about the one vase, which we've had access to through private collection, but there have been now probably a dozen that we've measured. And we're working on the analysis for this, but I can tell you that purely from the metrology perspective, so that the things that I mentioned beforehand about looking at the accuracy of form and proportion and the relative perfection of, say, the bottom of the vase, the top of the vase, things like that. Some of these vases are even more accurate than this one. Like, they zero out on the thousandth scale. And as you see, you also see this is the divine proportion here. The golden ratio is represented in the vase in a number of places.
And these were allegedly made how many years ago?
Well, so this one is a pre-dynastic. Many of these vases, they're pre-dynastic, as in terms of they come from, or they've been found in burials that predate the beginning of the dynastic civilization of Egypt, which was roughly just around 3000 BC, a little earlier. A little later than that is kind of when the first dynasty kicked off with the Menes, the first pharaoh of the first dynasty.
Around 5,000 years ago.
At least, I would say they're at least 5,000 years old. Many of these objects, and this one in particular matches the pre-dynastic vases you'll see in museums, and they're termed pre-dynastic because they're found in pre-dynastic burials, and they're found, and there's a lot of contradictions there, right? Typically, they're found in these burials along with very primitive pottery, which is always this strange contradiction to me. Is like, well, because they're found in the same burial, they'll say, well, they've come from the same period, or the same people have made them, which I think is always a very sort of strange leap to make. But most of them were found, like 40 to 50,000 of them were found beneath the step pyramid of Djoser at a place called Saqqara, who was a pharaoh of the third dynasty, and he collected them. And it's even acknowledged in the Egyptologists do say, and at the museum at Saqqara they'll tell you that many of these were inherited heirlooms because they've got names of like earlier rulers on them, or they've so they're saying that he was collecting them up and he stored most of them with him. But we have some of these vases have been found in burials that go back 14,000 years. There's a site called Toshka that's now underwater since they built the high dam in Egypt, but it was excavated in the 1960s, and it was a primitive burial. They found a guy in a fetal position, a skeleton curled up.
Yeah, I've seen this.
And in the burial, he's got this primitive handmade pottery and stone vases, like these what seem to be precision-made stone vases. I say seem to be because we haven't measured them yet. You can't say it's precise until we've actually measured the stuff. But you can kind of look at it and see these things aren't the same as the next thing, right? Because it's just comparing the pottery, which is the clay formed pottery. These aren't pottery; these are made from hard stone. It's not just granite.
You can't spin this on a wheel.
Granodiorite. No, it's a reductive process. You go versus pottery is kind of additive. I said, well, it can be reductive too. You take a lump of clay, but this is extremely hard stone in a lot of cases. You have schist, corundum, diorite, granodiorite, all sorts of types, and lapis lazuli, all types of stones, right up to ones that contain high degrees of, or high concentrations of things like corundum, which is a 9 on the Mohs scale of hardness, diamond being a 10, you know, steel being hardened steel like 6.5, granite 6.5 to 7, flint and diorite like 7.5 to 8, you know, fingernails are like a 2, coppers like a 3. So these are extremely tough substances, and there's just these thousands and thousands of these vases made from this material, and they're found in burials that often have essentially pottery that are set up and made to imitate the vases. They're even painted to look like them, and it's hand-formed pottery that isn't even spun on a wheel. Like, it's literally put together by hand. They didn't have the wheel. These are some of the contradictions.
They didn't have the wheel in pre-dynastic Egypt.
Well, they don't even credit the Old Kingdom with the use of the wheel. That didn't come until later. Like, they were dragging stuff along on sleds.
Right.
So they say there was no use of the wheel. So no potter's wheel, no lathe, because the lathe's a fairly advanced application of the wheel. But yet you have these objects that display characteristics of sophisticated technology, mathematical design, sacred geometry, and they're buried with very simple artifacts like pottery, hand-formed pottery that is I think clearly set up to imitate these vases, and they even look like them. I've got a bunch of pictures here that I can show you examples of this.
When you say they painted them, they painted them to look like the texture of granite with like the different color variations?
Yeah, if you've got that SSD handy, that drive, you go into the vases directory, in my podcast images directory. Actually, this is on Randall. He's on which TV is this?
He's on his computer.
Okay, yeah. If you go into the podcast images directory and into vases, I'll show you some examples. There's I think when we look at, this is not specifically related to sacred geometry, but I think when we look at the past and we look at ancient Egypt, I think we need to be considering concepts like inheritance, renovation, renewal. So if you go displayed next to simple pottery, that's go up, yep, 4, imitation, to the right. Yeah, you were on it. That's it. Yeah. So it's tough to see, but so you have here. These are pre-dynastic. This is in a pre-dynastic section in the Cairo Museum.
Oh yeah, they dotted it.
Yeah. So you have these are a precision-made sort of hard stone vase next to what is it's not a wheel spun but a hand-turned pottery vase that's been dotted up to look like granite. Right. And you see this. I saw it in the British Museum earlier this year. I've got dozens of pictures of this type of stuff. I'm fascinated by it, but pretty clearly imitation. Like this is. I mean, if you're in the business of making pottery vessels and you find like a hard stone, you're doing stonework, or you're probably working with limestone and softer stone, and you find a granite vase or something that's made from extremely hard stone and it's made with perfection, you would see it. I mean, you would notice it and it would become immediately precious. It would become an artifact that is valuable, and then you would probably try and imitate that. It's what we do today. Like, it's human nature to do that. It becomes precious, and then it gets buried with you, and then maybe it's an heirloom, or your tomb gets raided by the next king, and he takes it, and he's buried with it. I think that's what we're looking at. There's a huge technological jump between these two industries. There's like there's two different industries. There's a primitive and a sophisticated industry when it comes to many of these artifacts.
The tale that it tells is that this stuff came way before.
Well, I think so. Yeah, I think that a lot of the advanced stonework and the artifacts were potentially inherited from an earlier time from a civilization that had access to more sophisticated technology and potentially even knowledge. In order to be able to make these things, design and make them like we're seeing. And at the same time, we're seeing, because we kind of know what tools and techniques the dynastic Egyptians used, right? We found their tools. We found pounding stones, and we found copper and flint chisels, and we found very simple sort of hand tools. And we've got scenes on the wall that show how these tools and techniques are used. Like, we see the primitive methodologies that they were using to make and do stuff. I mean, and then at the same time, we have a class of artifacts that very much match that description. So, be it in pottery vases or in rough statues or rough boxes or columns, we have these artifacts that match the tools and techniques that we know the dynastic Egyptians used, and that we know how they used them because of these scenes on the walls. At the same time, we have another class of artifacts that doesn't seem to match that display signs of machining, of overcuts, of rapid stone cutting. High degrees of precision and symmetry into extremely hard stone. We've got the logistical challenges of objects that weigh up to 1,000 tons and more, being moved around. So
it's an insane amount of work. It's not just with the precision, but with the moving of these enormous objects. My biggest question, there's so many big questions, but like one of the things that always puzzles me, especially when it comes to the pottery, and not only that, but the big boxes that you find inside these pyramids that are perfectly square. Why do they need to be so precise?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think the answer to that is because at some point, or originally, their purpose was functional rather than ceremonial. There's a relationship between precision and function. We use the term precision all the time in our world, right? You hear precision this, precision that, precision razors, blah, blah, blah. The actual understanding precision is kind of a different thing. You do not develop precision unless there's some sort of functional return on it.
Right. This is what Chris talks about.
Chris Dunn is excellent. He talks about this, and in fact, there's been a couple of really good books written about precision and how it was developed in our modern world. In our world, it wasn't really a concept that we employed until, the thing that started it originally, at least in the industrial world, was the need for naval cannons to shoot straight. Right? We used to create these cannons by casting them. And then while they were still hot, they'd fire a cannonball out of it and go, oh man, well, I hope that's going to shoot straight from now on. That's how we make it. And they were like, maybe if we cast it and then we actually cut out the barrel, or we start to try and make it more accurate, we might be able to shoot straighter and shoot further. And so that was sort of the initial foray into precision. And then that was followed by the need to make chronographers and watches and timekeepers, because this is essentially how we eventually were able to measure longitude. You have to be able to measure time accurately to calculate longitude. And then once the industrial age came, steam engines and steam power became a thing, and so you have to start to worry about the precision engines and being able to make surfaces that can contain pressure. And so you do this in order to get a functional return. Right, and if you go all the way up to our modern world, we have, silicon processors that are down to like 7 micrometers, in creating transistors where we can fit millions and millions of transistors in complex logical circuitry down onto a footprint that's this big. And it's cost billions of dollars to develop that capability, but we do it because there's a massive functional return. Our entire world is built on the transistor and the integrated circuit. Everything we use, from washing machines, it all is part of it. But developing precision is extremely expensive, and you only do it if you have to, if you think you can get a functional return to it. Now, if you're building a box to throw a bull carcass into, or to put a person into, or something that's purely ceremonial,
right,
you don't need precision.
Right, exactly.
You color within the lines, you hollow out the inside, you slap the lid on it, you're done. No one's supposed to ever open it up again. But if you're going to the trouble where you are making surfaces flat to within, a few thousandths of an inch, or making, relative surfaces just perfectly perpendicular or parallel, or things that lock to create hermetic seals. You're doing that for a reason. There must be some sort of functional return on it. And I genuinely think that that's what the boxes were for. I think some of these sites themselves may have been functional at some point. I will say also that once you do develop precision, once you develop the manufacturing capabilities to use precision, then precision's kind of what you get when you make stuff. Think about it this way, like the industrial design on your average toaster today, right? Much better than it was in the 60s. Like it all works well, everything's aligned, the panel gaps are tiny, you press the button, everything goes off. It's because it's designed in a computer and it's done perfectly on a piece of paper, and then it's executed in a system that is capable of delivering precision, just because that's how the system works. Panel gaps on cars today are much tighter than they were in the 1960s. Everything clips together much better. It's because our manufacturing systems are capable of delivering much more precision.
Standardization won't work without precision.
That's right. Yeah. So that's also how you get to, when you look at artifacts that come from the ancient world, to me, things like statues. because we see high degree of precision in statues. We see perfect symmetry, which is an element of precision. I actually think there's an endless number of applications for this scanning technology to start revealing some of these geometric relationships and precision on these artifacts. But from what we do know, there's a high degree of precision in some of these artifacts that you could really only term as being artistic. Like I can't look at these giant statues of Egypt and go, well, that's functional.
Right.
It's artwork. Like it's
They're perfectly
ancient,
symmetrical.
but some of them, yeah, perfectly symmetrical. It's the ones that we've looked at. And eyeballing the others, they kind of look that way, but again, needs testing. But they're precise. The measurements that we do have, and the scans that we do have, and the analysis that's been done, they're precise. But I think they've been created by a manufacturing system that delivers precision. Once you have it, that's what you get. And potentially the vases fit that category. I think some of the vases may well have had a functional purpose originally too. Who knows what that could have been? I mean, there's all sorts of speculation you can make.
All right, let's take a break. I gotta pee.
Okay.
We're back. But I wanted to ask you, Randall, like, what's going through your mind when you're seeing all this stuff about these vases and the symmetry and the sacred geometry of these things?
Well,
I know you've had time to review it, but like as we're going through it right now, I'm seeing your reaction, and
a lot of Ben's work is relatively new to me. I've seen a couple of his presentations, so I'm still digesting it. And of course, it's consistent with this idea that, yeah, I mean, it's just one of many different kinds of phenomena that seem to point to some kind of a science or technology that is beyond what mainstream academia has recognized up to this point. So, I mean, if this was a standalone thing, it probably could be, even like the critics are trying to dismiss it. But the thing is that it's not. It's part of a whole corpus of different streams of evidence suggesting there's a deeper, more complex story of the human presence on this planet and what we have accomplished. Mm-hmm. And so a big part of my work has been about, well, okay, there's two points I think that we need to make here. One is that it's not really understood by mainstream academia the extent to which our planet has been completely remodeled from time to time and how severe and extensive that actually is. On the other hand, if your definition of a civilization is basically a reflection of what we have done in the last 3 to 4 centuries in creating this modern scientific-based, industrially-based civilization, well, if that's what you're looking for, it may not have looked anything like we would imagine it would look. In other words, if you're holding up a mirror trying to say, look for some manifestation of our own kind of civilization, and you don't see that, and then you dismiss the idea that there could have been civilization or a scientifically sophisticated knowledge of nature and natural law, well, I think you're going to miss it.
We're looking for the wrong thing.
Yeah, I think that we have to be open to thinking that there may be other avenues of manifestation in the creation of what we call civilization that don't look anything like what we now call civilization.
Yeah. Graham Hancock has a great way of putting it that I like to tell people is that he says that we have, and it's a good term, an electromechanical approach to problem solving. Like this is in the way that our technology and our civilization has progressed. We have this electronic mechanical approach to solving problems. There may well be other ways of doing that. It's like it's all you have to do is think about the technological progression that we've had as a civilization in the last 100 years or 50 years, and project that forward and go, well, there's we are currently expanding into entirely other realms of technology. There's some aspects of it, like some of this work that Randall's been talking about, we're barely scratching the surface of yet. No doubt inside of 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years, we're going to know more and have pursued in different angles and other paths of technology. I think what Randall's saying is exactly right in that there are other ways to solve some of these problems. There are other technological paths and evolutions that another or previous advanced civilization could have gone down, which, necessarily they wouldn't look anything like us. It could have been they could have progressed down an entirely different technological tree and solved problems in a different way, and thus resulting in something that looks almost alien to us.
Do we even think do we know or speculate if they even had something like commerce? Like everything that we have is based on, like you were talking about the silicon microchips, is based on manufacturing, spending billions of dollars to sell billions of iPhones to everyone around the world. It's all based on money to some extent. Like, I wonder if some of these ancient civilizations even had anything remotely close to that.
I think anything that we would attempt to surmise about that would be speculation. However, when we do look at, ancient cultures, we do see extensive commerce, trade networks thing. That's one of the things discovered now about, the Chacoan culture of the Southwest. They were trading all kinds of goods and materials all the way, like from the Hopewell culture up in the Northeast to, West Coast, down to the Mayans, maybe even into South America. So there was, if we go back 1,000, 2,000 years, there's definitely evidence of, well-developed trade networks going on. And I think trade, is a natural thing for people to do. And the model I work from is, the realization that when we go back to some of the catastrophes, like the most powerful catastrophe of the last, in my opinion, perhaps is, maybe 5 million years, is the Younger Dryas and the events around the Younger Dryas. And we know we can, as our yardstick, we can basically use habitat loss as a measure of how extensive a catastrophe would be. And then we can measure habitat loss by looking at species extinction, because particularly when you're looking at the top of the food chain, you're looking at, the larger species require more habitat. They require more time for generational turnover. And when we look at the mass extinction of species at the Younger Dryas, we're seeing half of the megafaunal species on Earth get wiped out. I don't think necessarily it was one single event, but it was a cluster of events that occurred that ultimately brought the planet out of the depths or the grip of the Great Ice Age into this interglacial age that we find ourselves in now. That transition involved the loss of roughly half of every species of animal on Earth, over about 100 pounds in body weight. That is an enormous extinction event. Now, it doesn't compare to some of the great extinctions in Earth history, like the Cretaceous Tertiary dinosaur extinction event, which wiped out perhaps 70 to 75% of all species.
And that's what we were looking at with the picture of the diagram of the crater impact earlier.
That's right, about 66 million years ago. Okay, or even worse, the Permian Triassic extinction event that wiped out perhaps 90% of all species, terrestrial and marine. The extinction event of 13,000, say the Younger Dryas extinction event, wiped out about half of the megafauna. So we're talking about the top of the food chain. It barely touched marine species, for example. Most marine species came through unscathed. Most of the smaller creatures, mammals, came through. Because, for one thing, they require far less food, they require less territory, quicker generational turnover times, quicker time from bringing in newborns up to, that they can survive on their own, the viability. Whereas the larger species, all of those are different. You got to have more territory, more food, generational time, turnover time is slower, it takes much longer to bring the young up to where they can survive on their own. All of those factors play in, and all of that would be a function of the loss of habitat. The loss of habitat means that there's not as much food for them to eat. And what we see is that half of the species that went extinct during the Younger Dryas, or close to it, there's some evidence that some species were already on their way out prior to the Younger Dryas. I think that is because we were getting into a series of environmental catastrophes. I don't think, see, a lot of the critics are dismissive of the whole catastrophist scenario because they have an oversimplified model in their mind. One of it. Well, it wouldn't have been a cosmic impact because that would have been a single event. And I disagree with that. I think that in fact, the evidence suggests that the nature of the cosmic environment is such that from time to time there could be periods of clustered bombardment.
Yes.
And as a consequence of that period of clustered bombardment, there could be a whole host of secondary consequences.
I love your analogy to this, driving down like a highway, or going through a busy city intersection versus like driving through the desert.
Yeah.
Or at 2 a.m. at night versus 5 p.m. You know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's not only a fact; it's your timing and it's your geography. Where if you're out there driving down that country road, that's geography. Now, if you've got an intersection and it's a busy intersection at 5 p.m., but at 4 a.m., it's not so busy. Your probabilities of having a catastrophic collision are going to be much greater if you're crossing that intersection during heavy traffic. And that's exactly the model that we can use to describe the hierarchy of cometary disintegrations and how they will litter their orbital pathways, particularly, the ones that intersect the Earth.
Right.
And in the early stages of cometary disintegration, the debris of that disintegration is going to be clustered or clumped. So if the clump is on the other side, when the Earth is crossing that orbital path, low probability. If the clump is right there, higher probability. And then, of course, through time, that clump spreads out. And now your probabilities are going to be relatively constant, but it's still going to be there. And that's like the torrid system now.
Right, the torrid meteor stream that we cross through twice a year.
That's right.
And what I was asking before we started, too, was is there any evidence of during that great year of 27,000 years when the Earth is going all around the equinox, is there a time where we go through, during that 27,000 year period, is there a time frame where it's more probable to go through more meteor streams?
Okay, so it's actually closer to 26,000.
Okay, that's sorry.
Okay, it's okay. We forgive you, Danny.
I see you honking the salt.
You better take another.
Ben's secretly trying to hit the salts with while we're talking over here. We can't let him.
First time I
pour
quite
it by
like that
himself. Yeah, I'm awake now. Want some, Randall? Don't be shy. Oh, this sounds
refreshing.
I
I'm
didn't
gonna
get
get
where I am today without taking risks.
Woo! Woo! Whoa! Oh God! Sorry, that blew my ears out.
Smelling salts. So this is what. Okay. Like when the women used to faint away and they had their fainting couches and you
Bring them around.
This is what they were using.
Probably.
So have you ever watched?
It's like when boxers get knocked out. It's like, wake up.
Have you ever watched? Yeah, exactly. Have you ever seen a hockey match or like a football match where these guys get concussions or they get hit really hard and they're sitting on the sidelines, and the medics will come over and they'll crack this little like thing right in front of their nose and they're like, they wake up.
Yeah.
That's the same thing.
Oh, that's what
It like it like jolts your nervous system and it wakes people up after they get knocked unconscious.
Where do you get this?
I think let me see.
Is it legal?
Yeah, it's legal. It's jujimufu.com. JUJIMUFU.com.
I might have to get that from you here.
Good shit.
Sorry, before we got off on the, what were you asking me? Oh, okay. So here's the thing. I probably should pull up a visual. It helps so much to try to. Okay, so this right here represents a full precessional cycle. Okay, usually rounded off to 26,000 years, and current measurements of the rate of pre, not pro. Get this straight, everybody. Precession, not procession.
Okay.
Why is it called that, precession, as opposed to procession? Well, because if you go out, is Ben waving?
Ben knows.
Ben, you want to answer this?
Well, it's a precession because it proceeds backwards through the zodiac.
Yes,
Through
because it's backwards through the. Now,
Precession.
what do we say? Well, if you go out and you begin to look at all planets, first let's start with the sun, go to the moon, then go to the planets. Everything is moving from west towards the east. Like if you go out and you stand and face the south, right? East is going to be on your left, west is going to be on your right, and you're watching the moon from night to night. It's going to be moving towards the east.
Okay.
If you watch the sun from day to day and month to month, it also, if you were able to like blot out the sun momentarily and see the backdrop of stars, you would see that it's moving against the backdrop of stars almost 1 degree per day, and it's moving towards the east. If you look at the planets moving, you'll see the same thing, with the exception of retrograde motion.
If you're facing south, you're saying?
If you're facing south
Okay.
in the northern hemisphere, that's the simplest way to do it. Okay. Planets do what's called retrograde motion, which is not. It appears it's a visual illusion. It appears that they're backing up in their orbits, but they're not really. It's only something that occurs when the Earth is lapping the planet. Other than that, everything is moving towards the east. However, the vernal equinox, which is the intersection of the two great cosmic planes. One, the plane of the ecliptic, which is Earth's orbital plane. Two, the celestial equator, which is the Earth's equator projected into space. Now, the thing you got to realize, I'll use this straw, perfect. Okay, imagine this is the Earth's axis. Right? Well, the Earth's axis is not perpendicular to its orbital plane. Like, let's suppose that Ben's head is the sun, and the Earth is going around, right?
Yes.
Okay,
The same side.
so there's a plane of the ecliptic that would, say, coincide with Ben's nose.
Yeah.
All right?
Okay.
Well, the Earth's axis is tilted 23.5 degrees,
Right.
and it's going around, and that's what gives us the seasons, right? Because let's say this would be winter. The northern hemisphere is tilted away from the sun.
So it's further in.
This
It's
would be
summer.
summer.
Now it's all right. Got it.
Close.
And these two are the equinoxes, where day and night are of equal length. Okay. Now, Earth's axis is not forever fixed in that orientation. Right now, the Earth's axis is pointed towards Polaris, the North Star. Half a cycle ago, it was over here pointed to Vega. That was the North Star, because it's doing this. Actually, I should be going this way.
Yep.
It's doing this.
Right.
And it takes 26,000 or a little bit less than 26,000 years to do this.
Okay.
The currently measured rate,
That's the great year.
that's what the ancients called the Great Year. The current rate, been measured by astronomers, is right at 50 arc seconds per year. What does that mean?
50 arc seconds per year.
Yeah. Okay, so you know that every circle is divided into 360 degrees.
Right.
Every degree is divided into 60 minutes, just like an hour of time on the clock is divided into 60 minutes of time.
Right.
1 degree of arc in a circle is divided into 60 minutes of arc. In fact, the term minute becomes because we're talking about minute parts of a degree. Now, for most day-to-day uses, you're not going to need more than that degree of precision. However, if you're like, say, for example, an astronomer, and you're wanting to measure the proper motion of a distant star, even a minute or a minute of arc is too big. So they have gone even smaller. They've gone to a second order of minuteness, hence the second, right? So you go degree, 360 in a circle. 60 minutes per degree,
A minute.
60 seconds per minute. Pick up your calculator. Go 360 for the number of degrees in a circle.
Okay.
And go 60 minutes, so go times 60.
Okay.
Okay. What'd you get? 21,600?
Yes.
Okay. Now go that times 60 for the number of seconds in a circle. Did you get 1,296,000?
Did.
Yes, you did. Now, I said that the current measured rate is 50 arc seconds per year. So divide that by 50, that number.
25,920.
You got it. Now,
Years in the great.
look at the graphic up here. What do you see right here?
29,520.
25,920, and 0. So let's say that this is now, and we're going backwards this way through the signs of the zodiac. We go one complete cycle. That's 25,920 years ago. Now, the plane of the ecliptic is divided into 12 equal pie slices, each of 30 degrees, right?
Okay.
30 degrees times 12 will give you your 360.
Okay, got it.
So everybody knows, okay, we're talking about the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius, right?
Okay.
And for the last 2,000 years, roughly, we've been in the age of Pisces. What does that mean? Well, it means that the point of intersection, the X marks the spot of those two great cosmic planes, the plane of the ecliptic, the plane of the equator, are moving through the signs of the zodiac at the same rate that this is turning. Okay, is this beginning to make sense? But what we've got here is each of the 30-degree slices, pie slices, have rates. Look at here. If we go back to the dawn of the age of Pisces, that was 2,160 years before present. BP is before present.
Okay.
We go back to 30 degrees or 60 degrees ago, that's 4,320 years before present. You can see as we go through here, each one of these average, so if we take, you got 25,920 in your calculator?
Yep.
Now divide that by 12.
2160.
Now 2160 represents what we would call the cosmic month, the month of the great year. So we now conceptualize that there's an analogy between our annual year of 12 months and the great year,
Right.
the cosmic year with 12 cosmic months. And for the last roughly 2,000 to 2,100 years, the vernal equinox has been moving through against the backdrop of the constellation of Pisces.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's moving now into, it hasn't gotten there yet, but it's moving towards the constellation of Aquarius. And at some point, which people can argue about, we would then have the age of Aquarius, roughly 2,000 years that the vernal equinox is moving against that particular star field. That would be the dawning of the age of Aquarius. And on that note, could you do a few bars from the classic song from 1969?
You have a much better voice than me, Randall.
Well, maybe if we all do it together.
Okay, you start.
This is the dawning of the age of
Aquarius.
That's it.
Okay.
Of course, they got the astronomy completely wrong in that song, but we won't get into that.
They got the idea right.
How close are we to that, though? Do we know?
Well, it depends on how you define it. We're not close.
Okay.
We're actually 300 to 400 years away from the vernal equinox, moving actually into what we now define as the star field of Aquarius.
300 to 400 years.
Yes.
That's pretty close in this scope.
Oh, yeah.
We're almost done with Pisces.
Yeah, the age of the fish. See, and then if you go into
Jesus
the
fish.
mythology, look, the founding of Christianity, how much fish symbolism. Follow me and I will make ye fishers of men.
I will feed you fish and bread.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
Some of his disciples were fishermen.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
People that drive around with the Jesus fish on the back of their car are actually acknowledging the astronomical age
Yeah.
that we're in. It's-
Ichthus, the fish, ichthus, right?
Okay.
So there's,
It gets-
and if you go to Hinduism, you had the fish incarnation of Vishnu, fish symbolism. If you go back then, the previous one, the age of Aries, you have ram symbolism. You have ram-headed sphinxes in Egypt.
Moses.
Moses, right?
What did
with,
he?
with
Moses,
ram's horns?
He blew the ram's horn.
Yeah, exactly.
Moses. Yep. So Moses potentially is a representation of the age of Aries, the bull. There's a lot of that, and if you go back,
The ram.
the ram, because
Yeah.
I was going to say if you go back to the age before and so if you go, what's the time for the Old Testament? So if Jesus, let's say, represents the age of Aries, you're talking rough intervals of 2,100 years. When was when did Jesus come in the New Testament? It was roughly 2,000 years.
2,000 years.
What was the period before that to Moses in the Old Testament? Roughly 2,000 years.
Right.
Yeah.
2000 BC. And if you think when Moses was introduced to us, he came down off the mountain with the commandments, and he found his worshippers doing what? Do you remember?
Worshipping the golden calf.
The golden calf, because the age before the age of Aries was the age of Taurus, the bull.
Yeah, so now
They're worshipping
the
golden
bull
calf.
age is now obsolete. It's going past. We've got a new age with new energy symbolized by the ram. So you can go back through and you'll see that. And once you know that, the astronomical component, you can go back and revisit myths, and you'll see a whole other dimension of meaning begin to emerge.
God, there's so many layers to this.
There's a lot of astronomical phenomena symbolized in our stories and religions, and particularly the Bible. There's
Right.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the whole birth and death and resurrection is essentially as telling a story about what the sun does during the winter solstice. So
And what is the speed of the Earth moving around the sun?
It's 18.5 miles per second in its orbit. So convert that into miles per hour. So if it's 18.5 miles per second,
Okay, 18.5.
18.5, and there's 3,600 seconds in an hour, you multiply that by 3,600, and that'll give you the number, which is the key solar number, one of the key solar
I
numbers.
quit. This is 666.
Yes. Yes. Okay,
Thank
so
you for
Number
being here.
of
We're
the
done.
beast.
the number of the
In
beast,
the
here is
bag, in
wisdom.
the books.
Let him who hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, 603 score and 6, is what it says.
Yes.
And it's not what most people think it is. It's
scratch a penny on his forehead.
So what is the
Semi-flex, the semi.
significance of the number 666?
well,
Besides that's the speed.
where do you start?
That's the question.
Well, it was typically a number associated with the sun. And there's a lot of symbolism that would take us
Good shit,
quite
good
far
shit.
afield.
Let's see if anybody's on. We may
Let's
read
see
or
if
may not read
this-
somebody.
Okay, the graphic is working. Okay, let me go into a larger. There we go. All right, so notice this line north-south. That's the Earth's axis.
Right.
Remember the straw that I was using.
Mm-hmm.
If you picture Earth's equator projected out into space, that's the celestial equator.
Okay.
And then you picture the ecliptic, which is the plane swept out by the Earth as it's going around the sun. It's the plane of the Earth's orbit. Now, remember what I said?
There's so many motions.
Yeah, and it takes a little bit of thinking to get this integrated in your consciousness. North celestial pole, that is where Polaris, the North Star, now is. If we could go back half a cycle ago, it would be tilted over this way, and the pole would be pointing towards Vega. And one of the things we do on our field trips, which is fun, is if it's, a clear night, we'll go out.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for
and
being
I'll
here.
point out
Thank you,
Polaris
King Nick.
in the
Thank you.
sky, the North Star.
New person.
And then you can picture
Begins with a V.
that we're standing on the Earth,
VXX.
and the
Thank you.
pole, the axis of the Earth, is pointing towards that. But 13,000 years ago, it was 47 degrees on the other side of a circle, and there's Vega. So now if you can actually picture what's happened is from Vega, 13,000, or half of that number, 12,960, half of that number around brings us to now, Polaris. One half more cycle, 12,900 years from now, 13,000 years, the pole star will be Vega. So if you're around, Danny, 13,000 years from now, and you try to navigate by the North Star, you will get lost. I mean, by Polaris.
Yeah.
You'll find yourself. So this intersection is the